Chapter 656. Although the white-clothed woman tried her best, she was still unable to break away from the wolves' pursuit. After several hours of pursuit, her internal energy was already exhausted, and she no longer had any strength left to run forward. Perhaps, I will lose my life here today. The woman used all her strength to jump up a big tree, her hand holding onto a branch as she thought to herself. However, at this time, her mood was extremely calm. She looked up at the sky covered by dark clouds and said to herself, "Tomorrow's sun may be brilliant, but unfortunately, I will not be able to see it." She knew that even if she released a signal for help, the inner and outer sect disciples would not come to her rescue. They were all summoned by the inner sect disciples' signal, and her signal could not be more attractive than the inner sect disciples' signal. Alas, not to mention that the wolves had already surrounded her, and several of them were already trying to climb up the big tree. It was simply impossible for her to release a signal. Looking at the dozens of wolves under the tree, a tall and thin figure appeared in her heart. If only he was by my side, perhaps only his martial arts would be able to save me. While thinking, her gaze turned from the wolves to the incomparably green orchid prairie. Just as she was about to greedily look at the world's beautiful scenery, suddenly, she inconceivably saw that the figure that appeared in her heart had actually run far away. It was flying from the prairie to the mountain range. This isn't a dream, right? The woman looked at the figure in the distance in amazement, and then rubbed her eyes. She then put her hand into her mouth and bit it hard. "Io, this is real, I'm not dreaming. He's here, my Senior Zhang, he's here." Needless to say, this white-clothed woman was the inner sect alchemist disciple Zhang Pinger, who was searching for the origin returning grass in the Orchid Grand Canyon. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's figure, an inexplicable motivation was born from the bottom of her heart. She once again raised her long sword, walked to the side of the tree, and waved her sword to stab several wolves that were about to climb up the tree. Zhang Xiaohua came very quickly. Not long after, she was near. When he saw Zhang Ping, on the big tree, who was looking at him with bright eyes, he couldn't help but be stunned. "Io, what a coincidence. Why did I bump into her again?" Immediately after, he touched his face in panic and thought to himself, "Oh no, why didn't I take out my handkerchief just now? It's too late to take it now. I hope she won't recognize me." But then he thought, "She's in danger by herself. If we save her, she'll definitely come with us. She must know that I'm a disciple of the Pill Repository Hall. But how could an ordinary disciple possess such martial arts? Who knows, maybe this junior sister Zhang's eyesight isn't good." Seeing that Zhang Pinger was in danger, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but shout, "Junior sister, hold on." As soon as she finished speaking, she couldn't help but cover her mouth. Isn't this just drawing legs on a snake? Zhang Pinger was busy dealing with the wolves. How could she have time to answer him? When the wolves saw that someone had come to help, they immediately split into 10 wolves and charged forward. Zhang Xiaohua took out her jade water sword and suddenly felt that something was wrong. She immediately changed to Chasing Dream. She flew up and executed the dream-weaving swordplay. Like a wolf in a flock of sheep, she only needed to stab 10 times to leave 10 dark red blood spots on the throats of the wolves. Without waiting for the rest of the wolves to react, she immediately rushed in. She raised her sword, and in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, those wolves were all dead under her sword. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned again. "Oh no, I killed them too quickly. Isn't my martial arts performance too high?" In fact, he had another thought. Lu Chaoxian and the others were at the foot of the mountain. If he showed mercy and a few jackals and wolves ran down the mountain, Lu Chaoxian and the others would suffer. Instead of using the flying sword at that time, it was better to directly show a higher level of martial arts. The person on the tree was also stunned. She knew that this person's martial arts were high, but she didn't expect that he was just a drop in the ocean. She opened her mouth and smiled. Zhang, just as the word Zhang left her mouth, her vision turned black. Her body went limp, and she fell from the tree. Seeing that Zhang Pinger had fainted, Zhang Xiaohua didn't hold back anymore. He flew over and caught Zhang Pinger in the air. He immediately transferred his vital energy into her. He knew that Zhang Pinger had been poisoned last time. Although she was cured in time, her vital energy had been damaged. She had been searching for the origin-returning grass for the past few days, and her body was already exhausted. Today, she encountered a pack of wolves and forced herself to run for a few hours. She was completely supported by her heart. Now that her mind was relaxed, wouldn't she immediately fall to the ground? After knowing Zhang Pinger's condition, Zhang Xiaohua was relieved. This kind of illness could be easily recovered as long as she carefully recuperated. Even Rejuvenation Valley's Qi Huang courtyard could treat her. Not to mention the inner disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak. Naturally, Zhang Xiaohua didn't need to do anything unnecessary. Moreover, he also knew that Zhang Pinger was currently depressed because she couldn't forget about the origin-returning grass. He had just picked this spiritual grass yesterday. So what if he gave it to her? After thinking, Zhang Xiaohua placed Zhang Pinger on his back and used his qinggong to go down the mountain to chase after the carriage that was now a little smaller than before. When Zhang Xiaohua caught up to the carriage, Lu Chaoxian and the others were very happy. When they saw Zhang Pinger again, they didn't dare to be negligent. They put Zhang Pinger on the empty carriage and continued forward. After a while, Zhang Pinger slowly woke up. When she saw that unfamiliar yet familiar face, Zhang Pinger called out tentatively, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled. "Senior Marshal Sister Zhang, right? I am Ren Xiaoyao, a disciple of the Grass Division of the Pill Expanding Hall's Tianmu Peak." Zhang Pinger was stunned and said in disbelief, "Your surname isn't Zhang?" Zhang Xiaohua rubbed his nose. My surname isn't Zhang for the time being." Pfft. Zhang Pinger almost laughed out loud and immediately coughed again. Zhang Xiaohua said, "Senior Marshal Sister Zhang, you should quickly take some medicine. Your body doesn't seem to be well." Zhang Pinger smiled bitterly. How could she not know her body's condition? She reached into her bosom and took out a jade bottle. She poured out a brown pill and swallowed it. Zhang Xiaohua was now considered a Qi Huang expert. Just by smelling the pill, he knew that it was the right medicine. It was just that the pill was not refined well. The smell of the medicine was so strong that after a long time, the effect of the medicine would be gone. After a while, Zhang Pinger asked tentatively, "Junior Brother Run is really a disciple of the Pill Expanding Hall? His martial arts are so strong?" Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand. "It's just luck, just luck. My family is a hunter in the countryside and is best at catching wolves. These wolves are nothing." How could Zhang Pinger believe him? It was just that it was inconvenient to refute. After all, from this person's figure, it was the senior Marshal Brother Zhang who had saved her twice. And including this time, it was the third time. For a moment, the atmosphere was quiet. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Zhang, rest for now. In another day, we should be able to reach the entrance of the valley. Let's escape first." "Io, you want to go out?" Zhang Pinger was shocked and directly ignored the word escape. She struggled to stand up and said, "Why so early? Isn't there still many days? Quick, stop. I still need to pick the origin-returning grass. I can't go out now." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He thought for a moment and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Zhang, what is the origin-returning grass you want to pick? Why haven't I heard of it in the Pill Expanding Hall?" "Pretend, just pretend." Zhang Pinger seemed to understand Zhang Xiaohua's meaning. She carefully took out a jade box from her bosom and said, "Senior Sister Zhang, after you've talked for so long, I have a rough idea of what Guryuan grass is. To be honest, yesterday I happened to come across an herb that I had never seen before in the orchid rainforest. I picked it casually and wanted to take it back to the Pill Repository Hall to claim credit. Now that you've mentioned it, this herb is exactly the same as what you've described. Look, if this is the Guryuan grass you're talking about, then I'll have a great merit. I've heard that our Pill Repository Hall's disciple, Lu Lihong, was able to break into the Wuming Hall with a 300-year-old ginseng. Then Zhang Lihong's face was filled with surprise and disbelief. As he spoke, he revealed a face of envy. How could Zhang Pinger listen to half a word? She snatched the jade box from Zhang Xiaohua's hand. Her method was so fast that even Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded. When Zhang Pinger opened the jade box, wasn't there 9 sprouts of the origin-returning grass inside? Zhang Pinger looked at the origin-returning grass in the jade box and her tears flowed down. She had risked her life just to pick 1 or 2 sprouts of the origin returning grass. This guy actually casually picked 9 sprouts. How could he let others live with his luck? Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother. Zhang Ping'er murmured. You're welcome, Junior Marshal Sister. Zhang Xiaohua casually agreed. She then realized that she had misspoken and quickly covered it up. Senior Marshal Sister Zhang, in the future, just give me more benefits. Zhang Ping'er's eyes revealed a trace of a smile. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Lu Chaoxian shouting from outside. Junior Marshal Brother, run, come out quickly. Look, the inner court disciple released the signal again. What? Where? Zhang Xiaohua was also shocked and quickly rushed out of the carriage. Sure enough, in the east opposite their carriage, there was a huge signal floating in the air. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua could clearly see that there were 2 huge words on the signal. Valley entrance. Upon seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua's complexion changed greatly. She shouted, Senior Brother Lu, hurry up. We can't delay any longer. If we arrive at the entrance of the valley later than them, we will be besieged by the herd of beasts. Lu Chaoxian, Senior Brother Wang, and the others panicked when they heard this. They whipped their horses with all their might, wanting to speed up a little. At this moment, in the far east, another sharp roar rang out. The sound shook the surroundings, and even the dark clouds in the sky were shaken to the point of shaking. There were actually some gaps, and a few rays of sunlight pierced through the air like golden swords. Chapter 657. That indescribable beast roar actually came from the far east, and spread throughout the entire Yulon Grand Canyon. It was definitely appropriate to describe it as a storm. Not only did Zhang Xiaohua's heart palpitate, she could clearly feel the anger in the beast's voice. Even the Dan core in her Naiwan palace slightly jumped. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly activated God Traction, and her heart slowly calmed down. Not to mention Lu Chaoxian, and the rest who were already pale. Even Zhang Ping'er was covering her chest with her hands. Her originally pale face had a slight green color. The 4 horses pulling the carriage were even more unbearable. Li li li, after a few mournful cries, their hooves went soft and they collapsed onto the ground. The galloping carriage also fell onto the ground. Zhang Ping'er followed Zhang Xiaohua out of the carriage. When the carriage toppled over, Zhang Xiaohua leaped up. With one hand holding onto Zhang Ping'er's waist, and the other hand holding onto Lu Chaoxian's neck, she lightly landed on the ground. The few disciples behind them were in a miserable state. They all fell out due to inertia. Their faces were bruised and swollen. Even so, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. She quickly put down the 2 of them, and turned around to pull up the 4 horses that were lying on the ground. Although the carriage was damaged, it could still be used. She shouted, Senior Brother Lu, Senior Brother Wang, quickly get on the carriage. Don't delay. This roar is very strange. We don't know where the beast came from. I reckon that it isn't something that the inner disciples can fight against. They are probably running for their lives towards the entrance of the canyon. Our Qinggong isn't good, so we can only rely on these horses. We don't need to be able to outrun the beast, as long as we can outrun the other outer disciples. After she finished speaking, she turned around and helped Zhang Ping'er onto the carriage. When the other disciples heard this, they knew that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't lying. They quickly got on the carriage and urged the horses forward. The legs of the horses that were pulling the carriage were still weak at first. After running for a while, they slowly recovered. Seeing that the carriage had regained its normal speed, Zhang Xiaohua curiously asked, Senior Sister Zhang, what do you think is going on with that roar? Why did it come out of nowhere? Did it just wake up? Zhang Ping'er stared blankly and said in confusion, this should be the 3rd time. A few nights ago, there were already 2 incidents. Could it be that Zhang, Junior Brother Ren, didn't hear it? A few nights ago? Zhang Xiaohua stared blankly for a moment before her heart skipped a beat. She turned around and asked, Senior Brother Lu, was there such a cry that night? Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't mention which night it was, Lu Chaoxian nodded with certainty. Yes, Junior Brother Ren, it happened that night. First, there were a few roars just like today's. However, it seemed like there were 2 monsters. One was in the east, which should be where the business came from, and the other was in the west, which is further west than our Chihua forest. However, today's roar was obviously sharp, so it should have come from the east that night. I'm absolutely right. The sound came from the west to the east. I can't remember it wrong. That night, not long after the sound stopped, countless ferocious beasts attacked our camp. Our brothers Lu Chaoxian couldn't continue. What happened to the disciples of the pill-expanding hall? Zhang Pinger stared blankly when she heard this. Then, she stuck her head out and looked behind her in disbelief. It was as if she had just realized that out of the hundreds of people she saw previously, there were only 9 people left. What about junior brother Su and the rest? And junior brother Chun and the rest of the outer disciples? Zhang Pinger asked in confusion. Looking at the confused Zhang Pinger, Zhang Xiaohua secretly shook her head. Sigh, the ignorant are fearless. This inner disciple's martial arts is bad, but her luck is really good. She was saved by me 3 times. Furthermore, it has been so long since the beast tide broke out, but she still hasn't met any particularly strong beasts. Well, it's no wonder. She always looks for remote places to look for energy-returning grass, so the chances of her being discovered by beasts are very low. At that moment, Lu Chaoxian held back the grief in his heart and vaguely told what happened that night. Of course, he only said that he and Zhang Xiaohua were hiding in the cave and saw the tragedy from afar. He didn't tell the truth. Zhang Pinger was so frightened that she forgot that since Zhang Xiaohua was beside Lu Chaoxian and the rest, why didn't she hear the roar at that time? These 2 roars, are they the legendary Yellow Wind and Black Lightning? Zhang Pinger was a little flustered. Zhang Xiaohua nodded slightly and said, I think so too. Not only our pill-expanding hall was attacked by the beast tide, but the other outer disciples were also in danger. Then he told her about the tragic situation he saw when he explored. So, we didn't dare to wait for the Wuming Hall's disciples to escort us in the strange birch forest. I guess they can't even protect themselves. Only then did Zhang Pinger know that the situation in the entire Yulon Grand Canyon was so dangerous. She was still wandering alone. She broke out in a cold sweat and her heart was full of fear. Then she looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who pretended nothing had happened, and felt a burst of emotions. She carefully touched the jade box that she carefully put in her arms, and felt an indescribable feeling. Chun Chun and the others in the distance heard the harsh roar, and their legs were also weak. Many people were in the internal breathing channel, and had to stop and rest for a while. At this time, most of the inner female disciples she had brought with her had returned. Only 6 disciples were missing. Perhaps they had rushed to the entrance of the valley, or perhaps they were still on the way, or perhaps the outer disciples were even more miserable. There were nearly 40 people gathered here, and nearly 30 of them were injured to varying degrees. In the past 2 days, nearly half of them had lost their lives to the attacks of the beasts. In fact, it was not that the inner disciples did not take care of them, but it was true that there were too many beasts. The entire area was a sea of beasts, and they could not even keep an eye on them. They could only watch as they lost their lives. Why did this beast go crazy? Chun Chun was very puzzled, and the other inner disciples were even more puzzled. After thinking about it, they still couldn't figure out how they had offended this evil beast. However, who could they explain this to? Fortunately, the inner disciples didn't lose many, much less than what the old elders had told them. Chun Chun could also explain to the sect master. It's just that we can't stay here for long. The sooner we reach the entrance of the valley, the sooner we'll be safe. Who knows when this crazy beast will come? This idea happened to coincide with Zhang Xiaohua's. Presumably everyone in the Yulon Grand Canyon was thinking this now. Chun Chun stood up, beckoned everyone, and flew forward. The inner sect disciples were all people with profound internal strength, so they followed closely behind Chun Chun. The outer sect disciples, on the other hand, were in trouble. They had been running for a long time and had long exhausted their inner strength. Their physical strength was even more exhausted. Now, they were relying on their fear of death to support themselves. When they saw the inner sect disciples stand up, they also forced themselves to stay alert and used their qing gong to follow behind from a distance. After all, the roar of the beast just now made them tremble with fear. Although they didn't know whether this beast was Yellow Wind or Black Lightning, they didn't want to face either. Well, if they couldn't outrun the inner disciples, As long as they could outrun the outer disciples, it would be fine. In the Far East, in a certain valley, a group of male and female disciples stood there in panic. They didn't know what to do. The roar just now was almost like it came from beside their ears, shaking them to the point of dizziness. After a long time, many people couldn't stand still. Senior Sister Xia asked, "Junior Brother Zhao, this? Do we still want to continue? It seems that the beast just now is close to us." Junior Brother Zhao gritted his teeth and said, "Senior Sister Xia, it's already like this, can we still retreat? That beast's target is the inner disciples of the lingering fragrance peak, not us. Even if we run for our lives, we can't outrun the beast." While they were talking, a sudden gust of wind blew in the air. Not far away, a beautiful female disciple pointed a finger at a place several feet above Junior Brother Zhao's head, and covered her mouth with her other hand, fearing that she would make some noise. Her frightened face changed. Junior Brother Zhao woke up and looked up. In the air, a faintly discernible yellow shadow had already disappeared into the southern horizon. Yellow wind? Junior Brother Chen was also greatly shocked. His legs were somewhat soft and he hurriedly said, Quickly hide." After that, all the disciples hurriedly ran to the cave not far away. Who knew if there would be a group of man-eating beasts following behind this yellow wind? For a time, on the entire Yulon Prairie, there were 10 people in Zhang Xiaohua's group in the west, driving the carriage as fast as lightning, rushing toward the entrance of the valley. In the east, there were inner and outer disciples led by Chen Chen for dozens of days. They were all using their lightness skills to make a final struggle. Behind Chen Chen, the yellow shadow like the wind chased forward as if it didn't care about its life. Although Chen Chen and the others had started 2 days earlier, they were still more than half a day away from the entrance of the valley. However, the yellow shadow was really like the wind. Even Zhang Xiaohua's imperial wind technique could not compare. After half a day, just in front of Chen Chen and the others, more than a dozen older people came from afar. They were Masters Junior Zhang of Wuming Hall, who had been waiting for the pill-expanding hall team at the exit of the Yulon Grand Canyon earlier. They must have also heard the roar of the fierce beasts and the signal of the inner disciples, and rushed over to help. Seeing Chen Chen and the other inner disciples in such a sorry state, they were a little stunned. Chen Chen did not care about them and only shouted, "The disciples of the Wuming Hall are still behind. Hurry up and help them." Yellow wind, or black lightning, were still in the easternmost land in the morning. I don't know where they are now. Ah. Yellow wind, black lightning. Although the people who came to help were mentally prepared, their hearts were still beating fast. Marshal Uncle Zhang hurriedly said, "As early as 2 days ago, my Wuming Hall sent people to report this news to the Lingxiang Peak. Maybe the sect master and the elders will be coming soon." At this time, Chen Chen had passed them and only shouted, "How can the sect master arrive in 2 days? Go and help your disciples and get out of the valley quickly." Before Chen Chen's voice fell, in the distance behind him, there was another angry roar. The same sound shook the wilderness, but this time, it was less majestic. The horse pulling the carriage on Zhang Xiaohua's side was not paralyzed with fear. Come. There are more chapters. Chapter 658. In the distance, after the yellow shadow roared, it suddenly fell from mid-air until it hit the treetops on the ground. It flipped a few times and barely managed to stabilize itself in the air. It turned out to be a little beast that looked like a marten. This little beast had yellow fur all over its body. It looked very cute. However, this little beast's tail was extremely large. It was more than twice the size of its body. Its 2 round eyes were as bright as gems. The sharp gaze that shot out from its eyes was filled with a feeling of vicissitudes. At this moment, its eyes were a little moist. There was a faint pain and anger in them. The most peculiar thing was not only its bulging abdomen, but also its 2 small claws that were gently rubbing against each other. There was also a vertical mark between its 2 eyes, faintly opening and closing. From time to time, there was a flash of silver light inside. The little beast paused in the air for a moment. Then its eyes flashed with determination. It swung its huge tail, and its body shot into the air like a bolt of lightning. A series of afterimages flashed past, creating a whirlwind. In the time it took to eat a meal, The entrance of the Yulon Grand Canyon was right in front of them. Chen Chen's heart relaxed a little. He estimated that they would reach the entrance of the canyon in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. At this time, it was almost dusk. However, the sky was covered by dark clouds and not a trace of sunlight could be seen. The twilight was also approaching the night. It was a good time to leave the canyon. Suddenly, there was another low roar. Chen Chen's heart palpitated, and when he looked back unconsciously, there was only a group of inner disciples in palace attire behind him. Then there was a group of outer disciples who were in a sorry state. Under the support of the elders of the Wuming Hall, they were chasing after them. There were no fierce beasts following them. He looked at Zixia, who was holding his hand. Her small face was also white, and her eyes were full of fear. She seemed to have heard the low roar just now. Therefore, Chen Chen did not dare to delay any longer. He gritted his teeth and mobilized the last bit of internal force in his meridians. His speed increased by 2 notches and he really rushed toward the entrance of the canyon as if he was flying. Seeing that the Yulon Grand Canyon was right in front of them, everyone was overjoyed. These days of running around had finally paid off. However, at this moment, there was a scream behind them, followed by another. At this moment, no one dared to look back, no one dared to slow down even for a moment. Even if it was their own martial brothers, their own martial sisters, who let out tragic cries beside them, no one dared to have any hesitation. All of them used their last bit of strength, used their last bit of internal energy, and charged forward. It was just as Chen Chen thought. At this time, the little beast had already caught up with them. The little beast's eyes shot out a hateful gaze, and with a swing of its huge tail, it flew to the front of an outer disciple. It gently waved its little claw, and the sharp protrusion on its claw tore the disciple's throat. A trace of blood instantly oozed out. The disciple immediately screamed and fell to the ground. His mouth made a hee-hee sound and his body rolled left and right. A grayish-black fine line quickly spread from his throat to the rest of his body, as if it had a life of its own. While the disciple was in pain, there seemed to be an unbearable itch. The fingertips of his hands kept tearing at his throat. As a result, the wound became bigger and more blood flowed out. However, in any case, the disciple's mind was still clear. The pain and itch all over his body hit his mind wave after wave. At this time he only had one thought. To be alive is better than death. After the little beast scratched one disciple, it swung its tail like a gust of wind. It did not stop and it swept toward another disciple's throat, then another. It was not that the outer disciples did not want to resist. They had already pulled out their long swords. Even if it was just a gust of yellow wind, they did not hesitate to stab with their swords. They wanted to save a little bit of life for themselves. However, could a long sword pierce through the wind? Obviously not. Therefore, their sword could only exchange for the bright red blood flowing out of their throats. Several outer disciples tried but failed. The outer disciples and the elders of Wuming Hall did not dare to try again. They just used their qinggong and desperately ran toward the exit of the valley. Everyone thought in their hearts, yes, we can't outrun the inner disciples. However, as long as we outrun most of the outer disciples, we can also safely escape from the claws of the yellow wind. As a result, everyone ran a little faster than usual. However, after running for a while, a few disciples would fall down in pain. In the end, the outer disciples were still no match for the inner disciples. When the little beast wantonly slaughtered more than half of the outer disciples, Chen Chen pulled Zixia and also rushed to the entrance of the Yulon Grand Canyon. At the same time, in the grassy plains not far away, 4 large horses pulling 4 carriages were also rushing over as fast as lightning. In the leading carriage, a tall and thin figure was holding a short sword as he stood firmly on the carriage's roof. The fierce mountain wind blew his clothes, and even his hair was blown to the back of his head. Wasn't it Zhang Xiaohua and the others who wanted to outrun the inner disciples? In the end, it's still too late. Zhang Xiaohua stood on the carriage and looked from afar. He secretly sighed in his heart. This is troublesome. I don't know how we can safely pass through. Now the carriage was still 100 feet away from the entrance of the canyon. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense could not reach it, but his eyes were very sharp. He had already seen that the yellow shadow was slaughtering the outer disciples. Looking forward, It was a group of female inner disciples in palace attire, who were frantically fleeing. Wasn't the person he knew at the front Chun Chun? Why is Chun Chun pulling a girl? Could it be her junior sister? Zhang Xiaohua's eyes naturally saw Zixia in purple. However, Zixia was following behind Chun Chun and was rushing to the entrance of the canyon. How could he see her front? Seeing that Chun Chun had rushed to the entrance of the canyon and was just one step away from the exit, Zhang Xiaohua was slightly relieved. He didn't know many inner disciples, but he had met Chun Chun once. Of course, he didn't want anything to happen to her. So Zhang Xiaohua lowered his head and turned his head, shouting, "Yellow wind is just ahead. It's slaughtering the outer disciples. Let's ignore it and just rush to the entrance of the canyon. Don't worry, I'm here to keep you safe." Just as Zhang Xiaohua turned his head, Zixia, who had already reached the entrance of the canyon, suddenly turned her head and looked in the direction of Zhang Xiaohua's carriage. Unfortunately, she only saw Zhang Xiaohua's thin and tall figure and couldn't see his face. She could only sigh in her heart. Oh, which hall's disciple is this? How could he stand so high? It's a pity that he is doomed to die at the entrance of the canyon. After thinking, she turned her head again and rushed out of the canyon with Chun Chun. After shouting, Zhang Xiaohua also turned his head and saw half of Zixia's face that had just turned away. His heart skipped a beat. However, that face and that figure had already rushed out of the canyon, followed by more female disciples in palace attire. Zhang Xiaohua had no time to think about it. By the time Zhang Xiaohua reached the entrance of the valley, the inner sect female disciples had already retreated. Even the outer sect elders and a small number of elite disciples had also rushed out. Only the outer sect disciples were left on the ground, either dead or alive. Some of them were already motionless, while others were still struggling with all their might. And that small beast like the wind was crazily guarding in the air in front of the entrance of the canyon. It suddenly went up and down, as if venting its anger. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. He held the blue water sword in his right hand and chasing dream in his left hand. He had already released his divine sense and prepared carefully. When Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense approached the small beast, he suddenly found that the essence of the world at the entrance of the canyon was very chaotic. There was a faint, irritable atmosphere, which he had never encountered before. What's going on? Does it have something to do with this small beast? Zhang Xiaohua was secretly shocked. While he was thinking, his carriage had already approached the entrance of the canyon. Lu Chaoxian's face was pale and his hands and feet were trembling. Zhang Xiaohua said loudly, "Rush, this is the last moment. Whoever can rush over will be able to get out alive." The small beast was rolling up and down at the entrance of the canyon, glaring angrily at the outside of the canyon. However, it seemed to be afraid and didn't dare to take half a step out of the canyon. Just when the small beast was angry, it heard the sound of horse hooves and carriage wheels behind it. The small beast didn't do anything and immediately faced the charging carriage. Then, without waiting for the carriage to rush closer, it swung its big tail and a shadow flashed past. It directly flew over and raised its sharp claws, aiming for the throat of the coachman, Lu Chaoxian. Lu Chaoxian's face was as pale as before, but he wasn't afraid. And it wasn't that he wasn't afraid, but because he couldn't see the shadow of Huang Feng coming over, he didn't know that the small beast's sharp claws were about to tear his throat. Just when the small beast's sharp claws were about to reach Lu Chaoxian's throat, a ray of moonlight flashed at his throat and a light dang sound was heard. It was precisely the small beast's sharp claws. The usually invincible sword ray only touched the sharp claws of Huang Feng, and actually didn't even leave a scratch. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. The small beast was also shocked. Its sure kill attack was actually blocked by someone. This kind of feeling seemed to have happened many years ago. Immediately, a kind of humiliation and a desire to win gushed out from the bottom of its heart. The small beast immediately abandoned Lu Chaoxian, and with a flash of its tail, it went for Zhang Xiaohua's throat. Its speed was actually twice as fast as before. Zhang Xiaohua was also careless. She blocked the little critter's claw just now. She thought to herself, "It's only SOSO." By the time the little beast reached him, he was already unable to see its figure with his divine sense. He couldn't help but be alarmed. How can this little mink be so fast? Seeing that the yellow wind, was already in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua had no time to dodge. With a flash of inspiration, he tilted his head and fell to the ground. At the same time, he raised the jade water sword in his right hand to protect his face. However, the yellow wind didn't stop at all and continued to descend. Its sharp claws were still aimed at his throat. "Io, what should I do?" Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. Chapter 659. Just as Huang Feng's sharp claws were about to grab Zhang Xiaohua's throat, a cold light suddenly shot towards Huang Feng's body. It was the Chasing Dream sword that Zhang Xiaohua had prepared beforehand. Chasing Dream was aimed at Huang Feng's slightly bulging abdomen. When Yellow Wind saw this, a look of astonishment appeared in its eyes. Immediately, it did not dare to take the risk. With a swing of its tail, its body moved aside. Immediately, Chasing Dream missed and Yellow Wind's sharp claws paused for a moment, giving Zhang Xiaohua an opportunity to hurriedly use the jade water sword to block Yellow Wind's sharp claws. There was a hint of mockery in the eyes of Yellow Wind. He did not dodge and directly reached for the jade water sword. There was still a dang sound, but this time, there was a huge force pushing toward Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua did not have enough time to react, and was forced back a few steps. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Xiaohua and Huang Feng exchanged a few blows. Lu Chaoxian and Senior Wang's carriage had only just passed by. Behind them, there were still two other carriages that sped past them. "If I'm going to save someone, I'll go all the way." Zhang Xiaohua secretly gritted his teeth. Raising the jade water sword in his hand, the sword light flickered as it pierced towards Huang Feng. How fast was Huang Feng? With a slight movement, it dodged. With another flash, it attacked Zhang Xiaohua's throat. "Why is it here again? Can't you change the location?" Zhang Xiaohua was extremely depressed. However, Huang Feng's speed was even faster. He could only vaguely sense the approximate location through his spiritual perception. He did not dare to be careless. He curled up his body and hit his throat between his body. With a roll, he dodged the attack. That Yellow Wind was also strange. It didn't try to grab Zhang Xiaohua's other body parts. When it saw that Zhang Xiaohua had dodged, it turned its head slightly, as if it was looking at the last carriage that had just sped past. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense was still present. Seeing Huang Feng like this, she was shocked. She knew that it wanted to attack the other disciples, so she made up her mind and formed a seal with her left hand. She pointed at Huang Feng, and Chasing Dream shot out like lightning. This sword had infuriated Huang Feng. He abandoned the carriage and turned around. Leaning forward, he dodged the flying sword and attacked Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's speed was no match for the Yellow Wind, and she hurriedly dodged. She glanced at the entrance of the valley from the corner of her eyes, and saw that there was no one there. There were only 4 horse carriages rushing past the valley. She could vaguely see a fair face looking out from the window of the first carriage. However, that carriage was still some distance away from the entrance of the valley. If the Yellow Wind turned around, it would only take a blink of an eye. Zhang Xiaohua crawled up from the ground, and immediately ran towards the east side of the valley. Huang Feng was stunned. It immediately understood Zhang Xiaohua's intention. It swung its tail and flew forward, following Zhang Xiaohua's figure. However, it was blocking his path to the entrance of the valley. Then its sharp claws shot out again. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly dodged. This time, the sharp claws almost brushed past her throat. In an instant, cold sweat broke out on Zhang Xiaohua's back. "This won't do. If I get too close to Huang Feng, it will grab my throat sooner or later." Immediately, before Huang Feng could reach out with its sharp claws, she suddenly turned around and ran towards the direction of the Orchid Prairie. This action was out of the Yellow Wind's expectations. In an instant, she had increased the distance between them. Huang Feng hesitated for a moment. The horse carriages had just reached the entrance of the valley. If it went over now, it should still be able to kill a few people. However, at this moment, the Chasing Dream small sword attacked again. This time, it slightly bulged its abdomen. This time, Huang Feng became anxious. With a low hiss, it increased its speed and chased after Zhang Xiaohua. In a short moment, it was behind Zhang Xiaohua. It immediately stretched out its claws and clawed at the back of her neck. Although it was still sunset, Thick clouds covered the sky and the sky was already dark. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to hide her strength anymore. She made a hand sign and flew with the wind. Just like Huang Feng, her body floated in the air, trying to avoid the fatal claw just now. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua could fly with the wind, Huang Feng was shocked again. Its eyes flashed with a trace of seriousness. Its body slightly stopped in the air, as if it was calculating something in its heart. At this moment, Lu Chaoxian's horse carriage had already rushed out of the valley entrance. Senior brother Wang's horse carriage was in the middle of the valley entrance. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was at ease. She smiled and said, "This dear friend, this Xiaoxia won't play with you anymore. You can exercise here by yourself." After saying that, she made a hand sign and her body fell like a stone. She was actually going to use the earth escape technique to escape to the entrance of the orchid prairie. However, when Zhang Xiaohua's feet landed on the ground and she made a hand sign, the green light shield couldn't sink into the ground. It just stood there foolishly. The surrounding ground was actually restricted, and she couldn't use the earth escape technique. In the air, Huang Feng looked down from above, as if it was extremely mocking. "Oh, this is bad." Zhang Xiaohua's expression changed greatly. He had already planned to run to the side and attract the attention of Huang Feng. Then, when Lu Chaoxian and the others rushed out of the valley entrance, he would use the earth escape technique to escape. Although Huang Feng was extremely fast in the air, it couldn't use the earth escape technique. It had to be said that Zhang Xiaohua's heart was full of wishful thinking. But man proposes, God disposes. He never thought that the entrance of the valley would actually restrict the earth escape technique. That's not right. I remember that when I first came in, I still used the earth escape technique. Why is it not working now? Zhang Xiaohua stood there innocently. This is great. I've been too much of a hero and now I've trapped myself inside. Zhang Xiaohua secretly complained. When his divine sense felt the chaotic heaven and earth origin chi in the surroundings, he suddenly realized. Could it be that the chaotic heaven and earth origin chi triggered the array at the entrance of the valley? Did it restrict the earth escape technique at the entrance of the valley? But before he could figure it out, Huang Feng attacked again. Zhang Xiaohua used the imperial wind technique to dodge. Then Zhang Xiaohua had an idea. His figure flashed and flew towards the entrance of the valley. At this moment, Huang Feng had already seen through Zhang Xiaohua's movements. Its tail moved slightly and blocked in front of him. It continued to attack his throat. Zhang Xiaohua stretched out his jade water sword and tried his best to stab it. But he could only block it once. When Huang Feng attacked again, he could only float up and increase the distance between them. Like this, Zhang Xiaohua charged towards the entrance of the valley a few more times. He was unsuccessful and succeeded in provoking Huang Feng. It actually let out a low howl from its mouth. Zhang Xiaohua's ears roared and the heaven and earth origin chi in his divine sense was stirred up by it. The speed of Huang Feng increased again. This time, Zhang Xiaohua was completely defenseless. He no longer dared to look for an opportunity near the entrance of the valley. Turning around, he used the imperial wind technique to soar into the sky and flew straight into the depths of the Yulon Prairie. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't use the earth escape technique. The path leading to the entrance of the valley was sealed by Huang Feng. Furthermore, he couldn't fight Huang Feng in close combat. Its sharp claws were constantly swaying around Zhang Xiaohua's throat. Other than escaping towards the Yulon Prairie, Zhang Xiaohua had no other choice. Zhang Xiaohua was resolute and suddenly pulled himself out of the battle. This was out of Huang Feng's expectations. It originally thought that Zhang Xiaohua would desperately charge towards the entrance of the valley. Thus, it carefully sealed the surrounding angles to prevent him from escaping. But when it turned around, Huang Feng was stunned. In that moment of hesitation, Zhang Xiaohua had already flown far away. Huang Feng looked at the empty valley entrance and the corpses below it. With a swing of its tail, it quickly chased after Zhang Xiaohua. Huang Feng's flying speed was much faster than Zhang Xiaohua's. In just a few breaths' time, it closed the distance between them. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't turn around, he had already released his divine sense. When Huang Feng was within 10 feet of him, he already sensed it. He secretly complained in his heart. When Huang Feng got close to him and raised its claws to claw at him. Zhang Xiaohua quickly changed direction and attempted to fly back. However, Huangfeng seemed to be prepared. Once it missed, it immediately turned around and blocked in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Then it clawed at him again. Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. This little thing wasn't easy to deal with. He could only fly back. Thus, one man and one beast flew further and further away from the valley entrance. Gradually, they flew into the depths of the Yulon Prairie. It wasn't that Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to fly back. It was just that Huangfeng had a tight defense and its speed was faster than Zhang Xiaohua's. He didn't dare to meet force with force. Occasionally he would attack with his sword, but it would only touch the sharp claws. By the time he withdrew his sword, the sharp claws were already in front of him. Even if he wanted to withdraw his sword, it would be too late. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua didn't attack. Seeing that the valley entrance was far away, Zhang Xiaohua secretly took out the dragon binding bracelet from his chest. This was his last trump card. Zhang Xiaohua continued to fly forward without even looking back. Huangfeng did not suspect anything and chased after Zhang Xiaohua. Just as he was about to catch up to Zhang Xiaohua, two rings with a faint red glow descended from the sky and wrapped around Huangfeng's slender neck. Huangfeng was clearly stunned. His eyes were filled with fear as his body froze in midair. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he was overjoyed. The dragon binding bracelet didn't wrap around Huangfeng's neck. It only swayed in front of Huangfeng, scaring Huangfeng into flying backward. Zhang Xiaohua took the opportunity to chase after it. Unfortunately, after chasing for a while, Huangfeng became suspicious when it saw that the dragon binding bracelet didn't wrap around Zhang Xiaohua's neck. When Zhang Xiaohua was feeling pleased with himself, it suddenly turned around and attacked Zhang Xiaohua's throat. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. He pointed his finger and the dragon binding bracelet fell with a swoosh sound, landing on Huangfeng. Just as the dragon binding bracelet got close, Huangfeng swung its tail and dodged to the side. The dragon binding bracelet missed. Zhang Xiaohua activated his divine sense and chased after it again. I've already mentioned this before. I'll reiterate that the next book is actually the second volume of this book. Zhang Xiaohua will still be the main character. However, the name might have to be changed. I haven't thought of it yet. DVS provided Huanichen. I think it's pretty good. If anyone has a better name, please suggest it in the comments section or QQ group 1148050076. Thank you. Oh right. Zhang Byron is just an inconspicuous foreshadowing. On one hand, it's to give Zhang Xiaohua the forbidden spirit. On the other hand, I might write about him in the future. I haven't arranged any scenes with him yet. Recruitment Kai sure once posted a thread asking about the meaning of being an outsider. I guess I didn't explain it clearly. Sorry. If the results of this book are good, I'll write it directly. It'll be the second volume. Unfortunately, the results aren't good. I didn't get promoted, and after VIP, I didn't get promoted at all. So if I write another 1 million words, I'll have 20,000 bookmarks. Naturally, I don't need to start a new book. Otherwise, I can only pretend to be inexperienced and start a new book. Does everyone understand? However, this book only has 3,000 bookmarks now. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much. Please vote monthly recommend bookmark tip. Thank you. Chapter 660. The little beast, Huangfeng, flew at an extremely fast speed. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense wasn't able to detect it. Hence, even with the dragon binding hoop, he couldn't catch up to Huangfeng at all. Not to mention, he couldn't trap Huangfeng. After dodging for a while, Huangfeng seemed to have noticed something amiss and continued to approach him. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to continue running. Behind him, there were two light red hoops that were like little tails that swung back and forth from time to time. He didn't know how long he had been running. The sky was already completely dark, and he couldn't see where he was running to. In his divine sense, the surrounding Yuan Qi was no longer as chaotic as before. Zhang Xiaohua was chased by Huangfeng again, and had no choice but to try to burrow through the ground again. Luckily, he successfully burrowed into the ground this time, and headed back to the entrance of the valley. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua disappear into the ground, Huangfeng didn't seem to be surprised. With a swing of its tail, it leisurely followed Zhang Xiaohua in the air. It seemed to be able to see Zhang Xiaohua's figure as he burrowed underground. After a while, the crack between Huangfeng's eyebrows opened slightly, and a silver eye appeared. The eye stared at the ground and gradually moved forward. After a while, the eye opened again and a faint silver light shot into the ground and penetrated into the ground. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua, who was burrowing through the ground, was pleased with himself. As the saying goes, skills don't weigh down one. I've just learned the earth escape and fire escape. When I have the chance in the future, I'll learn the other escape techniques. Look, although Huangfeng is powerful, didn't this Xiaoxiao escape from it? The light silver ray shot into the ground and pierced the green light barrier around Zhang Xiaohua. Immediately, the light barrier burst like a bubble, and Zhang Xiaohua's figure was pushed out from the ground by the strong pressure. Before he could regain his senses, his body was naked in front of Huangfeng's mocking eyes. It's broken! Zhang Xiaohua screamed in her heart. Without thinking too much, she turned around and fled in the opposite direction of the yellow wind. Needless to say, that direction was definitely the depths of the Yulon Prairie. With one running and the other chasing, Zhang Xiaohua lost her sense of direction. She only felt that the yellow wind was about to catch up, so she immediately changed directions and continued to fly. After changing directions a few times, Zhang Xiaohua, who had a terrible sense of direction, was completely lost. Of course, this was not what Zhang Xiaohua was most worried about. Although it was very dangerous for him to hide here and there, he could still avoid the attack of the yellow wind. His life was not in danger for the time being. What he was most worried about was that the night was getting deeper and deeper. It was almost midnight, and he would inevitably fall asleep. At that time he would have no strength to resist at all, and would be completely played with. Perhaps, when midnight came, it would be the time for him to lose his life. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the pitch-black night sky without a moon or stars. The strange thing was that there was no image of anyone in his mind. Then, the image of the purple figure that Chen Chen held hands with in front of the Yulon Grand Canyon at sunset flashed in his mind, as well as half of her face that could not be seen clearly. Who is this person? It's really strange. I thought I would think of mother, father, or the others. At the very least, Xiaoming and little Yu. However, there was no time for him to think carefully at this time. With a thought, he hurriedly took out 2 origin stones from his bosom, formed a hand seal, and directly fled underground. After forming the hand seal, Zhang Xiaohua immediately disappeared from the ground. A light green barrier enveloped him, and he sank into the ground. After that, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged, and just as he circulated the Carefree Heart Sutra in his body, he immediately fell into a deep sleep. In the night sky, endless starlight immediately penetrated through space and entered Zhang Xiaohua's body. When Huangfeng saw that Zhang Xiaohua had burrowed into the ground again, he could not help but feel astonished. His 2 black eyes were filled with ridicule, and the slightly cracked silver eye in the middle opened again. However, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua had burrowed into the ground and was cultivating cross-legged, the ridicule in his eyes gradually disappeared, and was replaced by astonishment. Just as Huangfeng's silver eyes were about to shoot out a silver light, they seemed to have seen something unimaginable and suddenly opened wide, revealing the entire eye. This was an eye that was similar to a human's eye. However, the only difference was that the entire eye was filled with silver. The entire eye was silver and did not contain the slightest bit of emotion. If one were to observe carefully, the silver eye seemed to be as deep as the ocean. In this endless ocean, there seemed to be an endless amount of fluorescent light. These fluorescent lights were like specks of stars that slowly rotated into a tiny whirlpool. The depth of the whirlpool could not be determined, and it was as though it could suck one's mind into it. The silver eye was revealed and stared at Zhang Xiaohua for a long time. When it raised its head, it looked at the starlight that was projected onto Zhang Xiaohua's body. It seemed to be able to see through the starlight that was invisible to the human eye, following which, the silver eye closed, revealing a faint trace. At this moment, a trace of surprise appeared in Huangfeng's eyes. Soon after, it floated in the air above Zhang Xiaohua, who was burrowing into the ground. The projected starlight also happened to envelop Huang Feng's small body. Huang Feng's posture was very strange. It was as though a person was lying down, and its slightly protruding abdomen was completely exposed under the starlight. Quite a bit of the starlight that was projected from afar was actually absorbed by Huang Feng's abdomen. Just like this, a strange scene appeared. In the entire pitch-black Yulon Prairie, in a remote area, a mink-like little beast was floating at a low altitude, revealing its slightly bulging abdomen. It quietly stopped there, and on the ground below it, a tall and thin young man was sitting cross-legged. Endless starlight was lingering around him, and he was cultivating without any distractions. The next day, although Zhang Xiaohua, who was hiding underground, did not see the first ray of sunlight, he still woke up on time when the projected starlight disappeared. At the same time, Huang Feng also opened the silver eye between its brows. When it saw that there was no more starlight in the surroundings, it immediately looked down. Then, a ray of silver light shot out and chased Zhang Xiaohua out of the ground. Zhang Xiaohua did not have the time to think about how he managed to escape with his life last night. In front of his eyes, the sharp claws of Huang Feng flashed with a cold light. Well, he did not even have the time to brush his teeth and wash his face before he had to escape. However, from then on his escape was ambiguous. Although Huang Feng blocked Zhang Xiaohua's escape route and did not allow him to escape towards the Yulon Grand Canyon's entrance, it did not want to close in step by step like it did on the first night. It only wanted to rip apart Zhang Xiaohua's throat with one claw. Instead, its speed was slightly slower than before. It was only slightly faster than Zhang Xiaohua's Imperial Wind technique by 3 times. It was able to keep up with Zhang Xiaohua, but it was able to give Zhang Xiaohua a chance to catch his breath and not to be killed in an instant. Zhang Xiaohua continued to flee like this for 3 days, and he was gradually forced from the entrance of the valley to the easternmost part of the Yulon Grand Canyon. These 3 days were the most exhausting Zhang Xiaohua had ever experienced since he started cultivating the way of immortality. He didn't know that Huang Feng had already shown him some mercy, and was only blindly fleeing, trying to think of ways to escape from the sharp claws of Huang Feng. As a result, his somewhat rusty Imperial Wind technique gradually reached a state of proficiency in these 3 days. If it wasn't for the fact that his body's Zhen Qi was limited, he reckoned that it would have reached the great accomplishment stage. Of course, until now, Zhang Xiaohua still did not know why Huang Feng did not make a move when he was unconscious at night. Even when he tried to use the earth escape technique during the day, Huang Feng still did not hold back and pulled him out from the ground. However, seeing that Huang Feng had somewhat slowed down, Zhang Xiaohua had a pensive look on his face. This Huang Feng came from the extreme west to the extreme east, and then from the extreme east to the entrance of the canyon. Now that he has chased me for a long time, his physical strength must be exhausted, right? In particular, during the process of chasing Zhang Xiaohua, Cucumber would occasionally roll in the air, as if he was in great pain. This made Zhang Xiaohua believe in his own judgment. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua was chased by Huang Feng to a mountain range. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the tall mountain beside her and an idea came to her mind. Other than the Imperial Wind technique and the Earth escape technique, I also have the Fire escape technique. The Imperial Wind technique is no match for Huang Feng, and the Earth escape technique was broken by him. I don't believe that this fellow is not afraid of magma. After thinking, she flew towards the tall mountain. Huang Feng found it strange and followed behind her. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the peak of the tall mountain. However, what made Zhang Xiaohua dumbfounded was that there was indeed something on the peak of the mountain. However, it was only a small pool. Where was the magma? She did not know how to use the water escape technique, and she did not even know how to swim. What was the use of a pool? After taking a look, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly flew down the mountain. At this moment, Huang Feng did not give Zhang Xiaohua any chance to catch her breath. His figure flashed and grabbed at Zhang Xiaohua's throat. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was a little angry. This fellow, he has been chasing me for 3 days. Although there were many dangers, I managed to avoid them all. He must know that he can't kill me. I don't even know who is the one who provoked you, and I don't even know what is going on. Why do you keep pestering me? Moreover, no matter what happened, you have killed so many disciples of the fragrant religion. And you even incited the vicious beasts in the Yulon Grand Canyon to eat so many ordinary disciples. You should stop now. Thus, she stopped running down the mountain and took out the dragon-binding hoop from her bosom. She directly put it on Huangfeng. In the past few days, Zhang Xiaohua frequently used the dragon-binding hoop while being chased by Huangfeng. Now that she had mastered it, it immediately turned into a ring of light and flew towards Huangfeng. Chapter 661. After a few days of pursuit, the yellow wind had gotten used to this artifact. When it saw the dragon-binding hoop flying towards it, it didn't dare to be careless. With a swing of its tail, it dodged to the side and escaped from Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense lock, following which, before it could even stabilize itself, it flashed into the air and tried to grab the dragon-binding hoop. How could Zhang Xiaohua allow it to succeed? With a slight movement of her divine sense, the dragon-binding hoop flipped over and wrapped itself around the yellow wind. As if it was playing, it dodged the dragon-binding hoop and flew towards Zhang Xiaohua. The jade water sword in Zhang Xiaohua's right hand immediately pierced forward. The yellow wind did not dodge and slapped the jade water sword with its claws. The sword radiance of the jade water sword was instantly slapped back. At this moment, the dragon-binding hoop chased after it again. With a turn of its body, the yellow wind tried to take advantage of the fact that the dragon-binding hoop had yet to return. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. The small body of the yellow wind suddenly stopped in midair, following which, a look of pain appeared on its face and it started to roll around in midair. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she felt that something was amiss. In the past 3 days, the yellow wind had played many tricks to deceive people. Normally, when Zhang Xiaohua used the dragon-binding hoop, it would immediately recover and try to grab it. The first time, Zhang Xiaohua almost let it snatch the artifact away. However, after waiting for a moment, the yellow wind seemed to be perspiring. This was something that had not happened for the past few days. Don't tell me it really has internal injuries? Zhang Xiaohua was ecstatic. Her first reaction was to turn around and run. However, just as she was about to turn around, Zhang Xiaohua immediately rejected this short-sighted action of hers. Isn't this nonsense? No matter how fast you run, you can't be faster than the yellow wind. You have already entered the Yulon Grand Canyon for 3 days, and it is impossible for you to escape in a short period of time. Once the yellow wind recovers, it will give chase and you will still be its prey. Thus, taking advantage of a person's weakness is the best way to go. Only by eliminating this man-eating beast now can she ensure her safety. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua clenched her teeth and formed a seal. She pointed her finger and the dragon-binding hoop immediately flew towards the yellow wind. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua was also extremely careful, afraid that she would be buried by this fellow. The result made Zhang Xiaohua flabbergasted. Although the yellow wind was constantly tumbling and she could not determine its position with her eyes, the dragon-binding hoop was still controlled by her divine sense. The yellow wind in the air actually did not evade Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense. Even when the dragon-binding hoop descended from the sky and firmly trapped the yellow wind, Zhang Xiaohua still could not believe her eyes. However, since the first step was successful, Zhang Xiaohua did not hold back anymore. She pointed her finger and the dragon-binding hoop tightened, locking the yellow wind in midair. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and the dragon-binding hoop dragged the yellow wind in front of Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the yellow wind and her eyes shrunk. She reached out her hand and took out the jade water sword. She poured her true qi into it, and the sword's tip immediately protruded more than 3 feet. Raising the jade water sword, Zhang Xiaohua did not hesitate to stab the yellow wind in the face. At this moment, even though the yellow wind was sweating profusely and its face was contorted in pain, it still looked at the jade water sword that Zhang Xiaohua was thrusting towards it with disdain. It endured the pain and the silver eye between its brows opened slightly. A ray of silver light suddenly shot towards the jade water sword. Zhang Xiaohua was already prepared. The moment the silver light shot out, She immediately floated up and raised the jade water sword, easily dodging it. Following that, she turned the tip of the sword and stabbed towards the abdomen of the yellow wind. The yellow wind's silver eye opened slightly, and was about to shoot out another ray of silver light. However, another wave of pain shot through it, and the yellow wind's body involuntarily writhed. However, under the restraint of the dragon binding hoop, it could not even move an inch. Its silver eye also opened weakly, looking at the jade water sword that was about to pierce into its abdomen. The yellow wind let out a hysterical cry. However, this cry was purely instinctive and did not contain any power. In an instant, crystal clear tears flowed out from its eyes. Its eyes were filled with pity, pleading and endless sorrow. At this moment, how could Zhang Xiaohua be bothered to observe the expression of the yellow wind? He couldn't wait to stab this terrifying little beast to death. Not only would he be able to protect himself, he would also be able to avenge the dead brothers of the pill-expanding hall. Why not? However, just as his jade water sword was about to pierce into the abdomen of the yellow wind, suddenly, a stream of fresh blood flowed out from under the yellow wind. Formless sword aura? Killing without a trace. Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He didn't seem to have stabbed into the yellow wind yet. Furthermore, how could the invisible sword aura be more powerful than his sword ray? As the blood flowed out, the yellow wind under the dragon binding hoop struggled even more. Its two little claws grabbed onto the dragon binding hoop and tried to break free. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua pointed again, and the dragon binding hoop became even tighter. The yellow wind was almost unable to breathe. However, even under such restraint, the yellow wind continued to twist its body. Not sure if it was trying to break free or because of the pain in its body, Zhang Xiaohua was only slightly taken aback. The jade water sword in his hand continued to stab out calmly. At this moment, only by stabbing the sword into the body of the yellow wind could he be at ease. However, at this moment, a stream of clear water flowed out from the spot where the yellow wind had just bled. Following which, a furry thing popped out. What exactly is going on? Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He didn't know what was going on. At this moment, the yellow wind seemed to be in extreme pain. Its small body was originally straightened by the dragon binding hoop, but now it was being forced to bend over. The claws in its hands trembled as it caressed its abdomen. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Within his consciousness, a huge wave of vitality was emitted. Completely dumbfounded, Zhang Xiaohua, who had a good understanding of the Tao of life and death in the heavenly Tao, finally understood what was going on. The yellow wind was actually about to give birth at this moment. The yellow wind was actually a female. Immediately, the jade water sword in Zhang Xiaohua's hand stopped. The sword ray that resembled a snake's tongue stopped above the wriggling abdomen. It didn't move at all. To stab or not to stab? This was definitely a question. Gritting his teeth, he saw the yellow wind, looking at his abdomen with a loving gaze. Hardening his heart, he saw the yellow wind caressing his abdomen gently without a care for his own safety. Zhang Xiaohua finally sighed when he saw the little head under the yellow wind, getting bigger and bigger. He put away the short sword in his hand. The yellow wind only had time to glance at him before it immediately let out a low hiss. It seemed to be exerting all its strength and didn't have the time to look at him. Since he knew that the yellow wind was about to give birth, Zhang Xiaohua could only turn his head to the side and look elsewhere. He then pointed his finger and the dragon binding hoop immediately loosened. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't retract it. He was worried about the unrestrained yellow wind. When the yellow wind felt the dragon binding hoop loosen, the expression on its face also relaxed. There seemed to be a hint of gratitude in its eyes. Then it forced itself to land on the ground and flew into a bush. Since Zhang Xiaohua was too embarrassed to watch, he naturally wouldn't follow. He looked around and slowly walked to a rock by the side of the pond and casually sat down. Actually, he was somewhat conflicted in his heart. He knew how powerful this little beast was. Not to mention that it had already killed so many innocent disciples in the Twilight Orchid refinement. Just these few days when it was chasing him, it had almost taken his life several times. However, when he saw the birth of a new life, his heart softened for no reason. And this sword really did not go down. Thinking about the innocent disciples who had died, Zhang Xiaohua had another question. If the Valley Orchid Twilight had been this dangerous for so many years, how could the fragrant cult be so assured to send their disciples in? Since it had been peaceful for so long, why was it so cruel today? Perhaps only this Huang Feng knew the reason behind this. Although the yellow wind was intelligent, it couldn't speak. How could it tell him the reason? Sigh, forget it. You kill me, I kill you. Who knows how many beasts the disciples of the fragrant cult have killed. Just as he was thinking, a soft chirping sound came from the bushes. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He thought to himself, this little yellow wind seems to have come out. Immediately after, another series of low growls could be heard. Zhang Xiaohua was curious. Could something have happened? However, Zhang Xiaohua, who had always adhered to the see no evil principle, obediently stayed there and stared at the bushes from afar. After a while, the low growl continued and the bushes kept shaking. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't bear it anymore. He stood up and slowly walked over. He chanted the see no evil incantation in his heart and walked into the bushes. He couldn't help but jump in fright when he saw a large pool of blood under the yellow wind. A ribbon-like thing came out of its body. It was connected to a small mouse-like thing. The yellow wind was lying there motionlessly. Its eyes were looking at Zhang Xiaohua, who was walking over. It was barely growling, as if it was begging or complaining. This Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He scratched his head and thought of something. Is this yellow wind trying to make me a midwife? However, looking at the yellow wind, that was so weak that it couldn't even move, and the pitiful little mouse by the umbilical cord, how could Zhang Xiaohua just ignore it? With a sigh, Zhang Xiaohua reached into his pocket to take out the dagger, but when he saw the caution in Huang Feng's eyes, he decided to walk to the umbilical cord first. With Huang Feng on his back, he took out the dagger. Chapter 662. However, Zhang Xiaohua had underestimated Yellow Wind's vigilance. Just as he took out the dagger, Yellow Wind behind him growled a few times. Its body moved a few times as though it wanted to stop him. Helpless, Zhang Xiaohua could only turn his body sideways and pick up the umbilical cord. With a swing of his dagger, he severed it. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's actions, Huang Feng slowly laid back down. Zhang Xiaohua cut the umbilical cord and walked to the little Huang Feng's side. He gently lifted the blood-stained little mink up. The newborn mink looked exactly like Huang Feng. Its body was covered in soft yellow fur, and its tail was huge. However, its eyes were tightly shut. Zhang Xiaohua felt that the little mink's body was very cold. It did not have the warmth of a newborn mink. What's going on? Are all little minks like this? However, looking at Huang Feng's vigilant eyes, Zhang Xiaohua did not dare to stay any longer. He placed the little mink in front of Huang Feng and walked out. Not long after, the sky turned dark. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment. He found a lot of dry wood from the forest at the foot of the mountain and placed it beside the bushes. He then started a bonfire beside Huang Feng. He did not know if this would work, but when he thought about the coldness of the newborn mink, he felt that he should do something. Yellow Wind was still lying there, exhausted. It silently watched everything that Zhang Xiaohua was doing. At first, it did not know what was going on, but when the fire lit up, it was startled. Then it felt a warm sensation, and it finally understood what was going on. At this moment, the little mink had been licked clean by Huang Feng. It was carefully hugging the little mink in its arms to keep it warm. When it saw the fire, it used its mouth to pick up the little mink and struggled to move towards the bonfire. However, it could not move and collapsed. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua did not go over. He pointed his finger and the dragon-binding hoop carried Huang Feng and the little mink closer to the bonfire. The little mink, who was snuggling against its own child, seemed so helpless. It did not have the domineering aura from a few days ago. It would lick the little mink with its tongue from time to time. At this moment, it was completely like a loving mother. Looking at the weak state of Huang Feng, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He took out a pile of jade boxes from his belt and opened them one by one, revealing the spiritual herbs within. Huang Feng poked its head out with difficulty and roughly looked at the contents of the jade boxes. Then it shook its head. Zhang Xiaohua was embarrassed. Don't tell me that these spiritual herbs are not good enough for you? Sai, forget it. It's all for this little mink. Zhang Xiaohua clenched his teeth and took out the sealed jade box from his bosom. With a few hand seals, the lid of the jade box automatically opened, and a wave of hot air rushed out. It was actually Zhang Xiaohua's precious golden fire lotus. A look of surprise appeared in Huang Feng's eyes. However, it still shook its head. At this moment, its eyes were filled with gratitude. Seeing that Huang Feng was still refusing, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to keep the golden lotus tinder. Then she slapped her head and seemed to have thought of something. She took out a jade bottle and formed a hand seal to open the bottle. A refreshing fragrance wafted out. Huang Feng's eyes lit up, and it let out an excited growl. Zhang Xiaohua also smiled. Finally, there was something that could be used. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua sent the jade bottle to little Martin from afar. However, when little Martin saw the jade bottle flying towards him, he shook his head slightly. With great difficulty, he used his head to nudge the jade bottle towards little Martin who was beside him. Instantly, Zhang Xiaohua understood that Huang Feng wanted to let its child consume this strange stone milk. Zhang Xiaohua pointed at the jade bottle and gestured a few times, indicating that there was still a lot of stone milk inside, and it was enough for the two of them. However, Huang Feng still stubbornly nudged towards little Martin. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he didn't force the issue and kept the jade bottle. Then he moved Huang Feng far away before he walked over and carried little Martin in his arms. He had carelessly walked in front of Huang Feng just now. If Huang Feng had done anything, he wouldn't have been able to react in time. Hence, he learned his lesson and kept a distance from Huang Feng no matter what he did. At this moment, when Huang Feng saw Zhang Xiaohua carrying little Martin, Huang Feng's eyes were still vigilant. Its two eyes stared straight at Zhang Xiaohua. If not for the fact that it was tightly bound by the dragon binding hoop and had no strength left, it would definitely not let a stranger like Zhang Xiaohua carry its newborn boy in her arms. Even though it knew that Zhang Xiaohua wanted to feed the extremely precious 10,000-year stone milk to its boy, when she saw that Huang Feng was so vigilant, Zhang Xiaohua did not move far away. She only maintained a certain distance to prevent Huang Feng from suddenly harming anyone. Then she faced Huang Feng and cast a spell into the jade bottle. With a shake of her finger, a drop of stone milk wrapped in qi floated out. Before feeding Huang Feng the 10,000-year stone milk, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the newborn in her hands. Putting aside the fact that little Martin was ugly when it was just born, just by looking at its pale face with yellow fur and its extremely cold hands, as well as the extremely weak breathing from its mouth and nose, Zhang Xiaohua knew that little Martin was extremely weak. Within her consciousness, Zhang Xiaohua could faintly feel that little Martin's life force was gradually draining away. It should be born prematurely due to a congenital deficiency. Zhang Xiaohua sighed as she looked at little Martin whose eyes were tightly shut. She did not know if this stone milk would work, but since Huang Feng was willing to let her feed it, it should be effective. Even though little Martin's mouth was tightly shut, Zhang Xiaohua easily pried it open and placed her little finger in little Martin's mouth to prevent it from closing again. At this time, little Martin seemed to have felt something enter its mouth. Its little tongue licked and began to suck naturally. Zhang Xiaohua felt little Martin's natural movements and her heart softened. She pointed her finger, and that drop of stone milk flew into little Martin's mouth. Soon after, little Martin pointed her finger again, and another drop of stone milk flew out. Just as she was about to feed it into little Martin's mouth, she heard an anxious low roar from nearby. Zhang Xiaohua looked over and saw that it was Huang Feng, who was looking at her and continuously shouting, as if it wanted her to stop. Zhang Xiaohua stopped and that drop of stone milk returned to the side of the jade bottle. Only then did Huang Feng stop shouting. Zhang Xiaohua understood, and removed her little finger from little Martin's mouth. Little Martin, with its eyes closed, smacked its lips and slightly revealed its little pink tongue before it stopped moving. Zhang Xiaohua did not rest. With a flick of her finger, that drop of stone milk flew towards Huang Feng. Huang Feng looked at the stone milk in front of it and hesitated. After thinking for a long time, it opened its mouth and swallowed the stone milk in one gulp. Zhang Xiaohua kept the jade bottle and no longer had any intention of feeding Huangfeng another drop of stone milk. He had the intention of saving little Martin, but towards Huangfeng, this kind of thought had somewhat faded. Subsequently, Zhang Xiaohua placed little Martin back by the fire and walked to the side of the rock to increase the distance between them. Only then did he send Huangfeng back to little Martin's side. Huangfeng used its enormous tail to hug little Martin tightly, the tongue in its mouth licking little Martin's body from time to time, as if it was seizing the opportunity to express its motherly love. Seeing that it was already late, Zhang Xiaohua took out a jade talisman from his bosom and placed the most powerful restriction that he knew around the rock that he was sitting on. Then he took out a yuan stone and burrowed into the ground. Just like a few days ago, he was cultivating underground. He did not want any accidents to happen at night. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had disappeared, Huangfeng was not surprised. The silver eye in the middle of its brows still opened slightly. After looking carefully, it struggled to get up from the ground and used its teeth to hold little Martin, crawling on the ground with difficulty. Bit by bit, it moved to the side of the restriction that Zhang Xiaohua had set up and moved itself and little Martin into the starlight that was shining from the endless starry sky. It was already late at night. A small bonfire could be seen very far in the pitch-black night. A small beast opened its mouth slightly and sucked in the starlight that was shining from the sky. In its enormous tail, there was an even smaller beast. Its eyes were tightly shut as the invisible starlight passed through its body. Its body seemed to have absorbed the essence of the starlight as it slowly and gradually changed. The warmth from the tail that covered it caused a trace of peace to appear in the small beast's slightly opened eyes. Zhang Xiaohua woke up from his meditation and Huangfeng on the ground also opened its eyes at the same time. Zhang Xiaohua burrowed out of the ground and looked at Huangfeng, who was waiting beside the restriction and the extinguished bonfire nearby. He frowned slightly. It was a clear day today and the sun had just peeked out from the distant horizon. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had appeared on the rock, Huangfeng stood up. Although it still looked weak, it was much stronger than yesterday. Huangfeng held little Martin in its mouth and hid in the bushes again. When Huangfeng was far away, Zhang Xiaohua removed the restriction and looked at Huangfeng, who was hiding in the bushes. He said in a clear voice, "This dear friend, I think that must be the one called Huangfeng. Dear friend, I don't know if you can understand, but I still have to say these words to you. You have lived for many years and must be much older than this one. Calling you a dear friend is already a climb for me. Although you have been chasing this one for the past few days and have killed many disciples of the fragrant religion, I should have stabbed you to death. But if I kill you, this newborn little Martin will also die. Alas, the heavens are virtuous and I can't do it. I think I will let you go today. I hope you will remember not to harm the lives of the disciples of the fragrant religion." They also. At this point, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to continue. After all, the disciples of the fragrant religion came to the Yulon Grand Canyon to hunt beasts. If he wanted to kill Huangfeng, would he not let him fight back? In the end he could only mutter, "In any case, you are powerful. They won't dare to provoke you. Since they won't provoke you, you shouldn't take their lives." As for the rest, Zhang Xiaohua sighed. Things were chosen by the heavens, and the strong preyed on the weak. He understood this and couldn't continue. Please vote, please collect, please tip, thank you. Chapter 663. After Zhang Xiaohua finished speaking, that yellow wind seemed to understand and growled a few times from within the underbrush. All right, since my dear friend has already understood, then this one can be at ease. Currently, there are no longer any disciples of the fragrant religion in the entire Yulon Grand Canyon. You have harmed many disciples. I reckon that the leader of the fragrant religion will soon bring people to encircle and annihilate you. You should quickly bring your boy and find a safe place to hide. All right, I'm leaving. Since I've already participated in the Yulon Dusk refinement, I think I won't be coming here again. Take care of yourself, May we meet again. After speaking, Zhang Xiaohua did not stay any longer and turned around to leave. He wanted to wait until he was 10 zhang away before taking back the dragon binding ring. Looking at how weak Yellow Wind was now, he could use the Imperial Wind technique. No matter what, it would not be able to catch up. As long as he did not let it get close to him, he would not be in any danger. However, just as Zhang Xiaohua turned around, a mournful cry came from within the underbrush. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat, but he still ignored it and calmly continued walking. At this moment, that yellow wind staggered out from the underbrush and chased behind him. As it chased, it growled softly from the corner of its mouth. Zhang Xiaohua saw that yellow wind chased after him and was startled. The imperial wind technique flew into the air. He did not dare to let it get close. That yellow wind saw that Zhang Xiaohua had flown up, but it stood on the ground without moving and only growled. Its big tail swung weakly behind, and its small mouth kept pointing in one direction. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand at first, but yellow wind was not in a hurry. It closed its eyes for a moment, and its body slowly flew up. Its sharp little claws pointed in the direction where the little mouth was pointing, and pointed again and again. Standing in the air, Zhang Xiaohua used his hand to touch his chin. He seemed to have understood the meaning of yellow wind. It should be telling him to go there. However, what was the point of going there? His orchid dusk refinement had already ended. What he needed to do the most now was to quickly leave the valley. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua hesitating in the air, yellow wind landed on the ground. After panting for a while, it staggered back into the bushes and picked up little Martin with its teeth with great difficulty. It seemed to be using all its strength to slowly float up. When it was only 3 inches above the ground, it was about to head in the direction that Zhang Xiaohua had pointed out. This seeing Huang Feng so anxious, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but wonder if this was a trap set by Huang Feng. However, when she saw Huang Feng floating in the air with great difficulty, and the look of anticipation in its eyes when it turned back and the dragon binding hoop that was tightly bound to Huang Feng, Zhang Xiaohua's courage was boosted. She thought to herself, this fellow is so weak, and I have the dragon binding hoop that can restrain it at any time. Why should I be afraid of it? Thus, Zhang Xiaohua cast a spell and pointed her finger. The dragon binding hoop flew up and dragged Huang Feng towards the direction that it had pointed out. Zhang Xiaohua carefully followed behind it, maintaining a distance of a few feet. After flying for less than 10 minutes, Huang Feng couldn't hold on any longer. It turned around and rolled its eyes. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly used the dragon binding hoop to put it down. Huang Feng placed little Martin on the ground and stood there panting nonstop. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while, and pointed at the small Martin on the ground. Then, she pointed at the small Martin in her arms and smiled. Dear friend, if you don't mind, let me carry this small Martin for you first. What do you think? When Huang Feng heard this, it seemed to understand. It couldn't bear to look at the boy in front of it, and walked forward with great difficulty. Then it stopped and turned around to look at little Martin. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and walked over. She bent down and carried little Martin in her arms. Yes, she was carrying it. Actually, little Martin was as big as a mouse. Zhang Xiaohua could carry it with one hand. At this moment, little Martin's breathing seemed to be a little stronger than yesterday. However, it was still intermittent. Its body was no longer cold, but it wasn't much stronger than yesterday. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua held little Martin in front of her chest, trying to warm it up with her body temperature. Maybe it was because Zhang Xiaohua's body was obviously bigger than Huang Feng, or maybe it was because Zhang Xiaohua's body temperature was higher than Huang Feng. In any case, little Martin leaned on Zhang Xiaohua's chest and actually rubbed its little head slightly. It squeezed into Zhang Xiaohua's arms again before it rested in Zhang Xiaohua's arms. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Could it be that this little guy thinks of me as its mother? In the distance, when Huang Feng saw this scene, a trace of jealousy and a strange light flashed across its eyes. After settling little Martin down, Zhang Xiaohua pointed with her finger. The two dragon binding hoops lined up side by side and carefully supported Huang Feng, trying not to let it exert any strength as it flew rapidly in front. Zhang Xiaohua continued to stay far away, carefully following behind. Originally, she thought that Huang Feng was pointing to a very close place. Unexpectedly, under Huang Feng's guidance, they actually walked for half a day. When it was close to noon and the sun had risen to its highest point, they finally arrived at the top of a tall mountain. Zhang Xiaohua landed from the sky and looked left and right. He didn't find anything strange. At least he didn't find any traps. Hence he continued to let the dragon-binding hoops support Huangfeng. Under Huangfeng's guidance, they went around a straight cliff and flew down. Right at the top of the cliff, there was a small cave facing the south. It was just big enough for one person to enter. Seeing Huangfeng's guidance in midair, Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to scan the cave. She didn't find anything strange inside and sent Huangfeng into the cave first. Then she circled around the cave. This cave was on top of the cliff and was extremely high up. If not for Zhang Xiaohua's imperial wind technique, even the levitation technique from before wouldn't be able to safely fly here. Not to mention martial arts lightness skill. In Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, even the most profound lightness skill in the pugilistic world wouldn't be able to reach this cave from the top of the cliff or from the bottom of the mountain. Furthermore, this cave was extremely small. On top of the huge cliff, it wasn't obvious at all. If not for Huangfeng's guidance, Zhang Xiaohua wouldn't have been able to find this place. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense followed the dragon-binding hoop into the cave. Seeing Huangfeng standing there obediently and waiting, Zhang Xiaohua then entered the cave with ease. After entering the cave, Zhang Xiaohua then realized that she was wrong. This place was only a passageway in the cave, and there was still a long way ahead. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua could only bend down and follow behind Huangfeng. As they went deeper into the cave, the passageway became higher and higher. Zhang Xiaohua could slowly straighten her back. Furthermore, what made Zhang Xiaohua the happiest was that there were fist-sized luminous pearls embedded in the passageway. It was these luminous pearls that lit up the entire passageway. After walking for the time needed to drink a cup of tea, they seemed to have reached the middle of the mountain. The passageway finally came to an end. What greeted them was a rather large space. To Zhang Xiaohua, it was only rather large. To Huangfeng, it was probably huge. Once they entered the hall, Zhang Xiaohua immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Because what greeted them was the corpse of a black dog lying on the floor of the hall. Black lightning. Zhang Xiaohua's first reaction was, this must be black lightning. Needless to say, Huangfeng had appeared but black lightning was nowhere to be seen. Zhang Xiaohua originally thought that black lightning had died long ago. However, after hearing from Lu Chaoxian and the rest that night, there was another angry roar other than Huangfeng. Zhang Xiaohua vaguely felt that something was amiss. Now that she saw the corpse of black lightning, she immediately understood why Huangfeng had gone crazy and wanted to kill the disciples of the fragrant cult. Black lightning had been killed. How could Huangfeng not seek revenge? In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua's hatred towards Huangfeng lessened by a little. However, he still did not dare to take back the dragon binding ring. When Huangfeng saw the corpse of black lightning, it let out a sorrowful cry and walked towards it. Zhang Xiaohua used the dragon binding ring to send it over as she slowly walked over. However, when Zhang Xiaohua saw the tragic state of black lightning, her heart couldn't help but palpitate. Black lightning was the same size as the black dog that Zhang Xiaohua usually saw. It had square ears and a short tail. However, it was lying on the floor with its four legs dangling in front of its chest and abdomen. Its abdomen had been cut open from chest to abdomen. The soil around Black Lightning's corpse had been soaked black by the blood that flowed out from Black Lightning. Even Zhang Xiaohua's heart ached when he saw such a tragic state, let alone Huangfeng. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and walked forward. She first looked at Huangfeng, then pointed at Black Lightning. Huangfeng nodded slightly and walked away. Zhang Xiaohua squatted down and opened up Black Lightning's wound to take a closer look. He was very curious as to why someone would kill Black Lightning. What exactly could he find from Black Lightning's body? Zhang Xiaohua had studied Qi Huang before, so he was very familiar with the human body. Of course, he wasn't unfamiliar with Black Lightning's body either. Based on Zhang Xiaohua's impression of the human body, he couldn't find anything missing even after looking at it for a long time. Maybe it's his style of killing people. Zhang Xiaohua could only think so. Then Zhang Xiaohua stood up and said to the distant Huangfeng, "My dear friend, after seeing your friend's corpse, I can understand your difficulties. However, Even though you are grieving, you still need to distinguish between right and wrong. To be honest, with your divine powers, even I am no match for you, much less a disciple of the fragrant cult. Even an inner disciple wouldn't be able to harm you. I think that the person who killed your friend must be someone with great martial arts skills. If I'm not mistaken, it should be someone from the upper echelons of the fragrant cult. If you want revenge, you should look for at this point, he stuttered. Obviously, the upper echelons of the fragrant cult were also members of the fragrant cult. Huang Feng killed a disciple of the fragrant cult, it seemed, who knew that Huang Feng ignored him and walked to a corner. After standing there for a long time, those silver eyes opened again and a ray of silver light shot out. Chapter 664. About half a day's journey southwest from the mountain peak, where Zhang Xiaohua was located, a group of male and female disciples were still busily searching for spiritual herbs in a lush green forest. Junior Marshal Brother Zhao, who was leading the group, sat proudly on a red horse. His thin chin was slightly stretched forward, and he squinted his eyes to look at the sunlight that shone through the leaves. He had a complacent look on his face. Senior Marshal Sister Xia, who was beside him, had completely lost the arrogance of a senior martial sister. She looked at the excited disciples who found spiritual herbs from time to time, and then looked at the jade boxes piled up like a mountain on the several carriages behind her. She was convinced and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Zhao, I finally understand why the hall master gave you this important task before we set off. In such a difficult and dangerous time, you can actually make such a calm judgment and collect so many spiritual herbs and treasures for our hall. Could this be the legendary fearless in the face of danger? As a senior martial sister, I am convinced." Junior Marshal Brother Zhao waved his hand and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Xia, you flatter me. It was just a moment of luck. Moreover, this junior martial brother has always been in the Jianghu and has seen many such tricks. If senior martial sister Xia had half of this junior martial brother's experience, then your achievements would definitely be more than double of this junior martial brother's." Senior martial sister Xia smiled like a flower and said, "Look at what you're saying. Everyone says that junior martial brother Zhao knows how to conduct himself, and is a first-class figure in the hall." Senior martial sister didn't care about it before, but now it seems that no matter whether it's handling matters or decision-making, they are all absolutely brilliant. Compared to some of the so-called direct disciples, you are not just a little bit better. Hearing this, junior martial brother Zhao's face turned cold. He turned his head to look at a male disciple who was squatting in the distance and carefully picking spiritual herbs. He curled his lips and sneered, "Direct disciples? What direct disciples are there now?" Then he looked at the world outside the forest and muttered, "Perhaps only the disciples on Lingering Fragrance Peak can be direct disciples." Senior Martial Sister Xia also had a look of longing and said, "Yes, I always thought that my martial arts were excellent. But after seeing the inner disciples, I realized that I was just a frog in a well." Then he added, "Not only is junior apprentice Brother Zhao meticulous, decisive, and able to see the big picture, his martial arts are also second to none. Moreover, he has obtained the favor of the hall master. This Lingering Fragrance Peak will open its doors to junior apprentice brother sooner or later." Junior martial brother Zhao's face flushed red. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior martial sister Xia is also ordinary. Don't all the female disciples in this hall follow senior martial sister's lead? Furthermore, our fragrant religion has always prioritized female disciples. In the future, senior sister Xia will have many more opportunities to enter Lingering Fragrance Peak than I do. And if senior sister Xia gains any advantages, you will have to guide me." Senior martial sister Xia understood tacitly. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Junior martial brother Zhao is praising us too much. We are in the same boat. After this section, junior martial brother Zhao will definitely soar to the sky. Senior martial sister is still waiting for your guidance." "Ha ha ha," junior martial brother Zhao laughed softly. "Since senior martial sister says we are in the same boat, then we will not distinguish between each other. In the future, we will support each other and progress together." After he finished speaking, he inadvertently glanced in another direction. There were a few female disciples bent over, and seemed to be busy as well. At this moment, one of the tall female disciples tilted her body, and let out a low cry. Junior martial brother Zhao unconsciously moved his body, and was about to go in that direction. But then he coughed softly and pretended to have just seen it. He raised his head and smiled. Junior martial sisters have also worked hard. I wonder what happened over there. Senior martial sister Xia looked at junior martial brother Zhao and smiled thoughtfully. Oh, they must have accidentally bumped into something. And look, the others have also gone over. There was no warning, so it shouldn't be a big matter. Then she said, the most dangerous things have been avoided under junior martial brother's lead. What is this small matter? Oh, that's right, a few days ago, the last signal sent by the inner court disciples was unclear. They must have reached the entrance of the valley. Also, the ferocious beast's roar was also in that direction. There hasn't been any movement in the past few days, so they must have all gone out, right? Junior martial brother Zhao's eyes were still slightly slanted as he looked in that direction from time to time. He said absent-mindedly, perhaps they have safely evacuated, or perhaps they were killed by the ferocious beast. Either way, it happened at the entrance of the valley, far away from us. Also, the ferocious beast should have returned to the west. Our east side should be safe. These junior sisters should be cultivating properly in the hall. Bringing them here really makes me worry a lot. Senior martial sister Xia probed. Junior martial brother Zhao is wise and powerful. You are also favored by the hall master. You must be the idol in the hearts of all the female disciples. If not for the fact that I am much older than you, I would definitely admire you. Haha, looking at junior martial brother's appearance, it seems junior martial brother Zhao was taken aback. He immediately retracted his wandering gaze and smiled apologetically. Look at what senior martial sister is saying. Senior martial sister is at the age of a flower. Not to mention me, even the disciples in the hall, which one of them doesn't look forward to speaking to senior martial sister? It's just that senior martial sister's standards are too high and you have never looked us in the eye. Senior martial sister Xia looked at junior martial brother Zhao with a hint of charm in her eyes. She said softly, senior martial sister doesn't know that junior martial brother also has such thoughts? Then her face blushed a little and her voice became even softer. Junior martial brother's charm? I have also seen it with my own eyes. When these words came out, senior martial sister Xia's head had already fallen to the ground. Junior martial brother Zhao was taken aback. He looked at senior martial sister Xia, who had lowered her head, then turned his head to look at the tall lady who had already returned to normal. The corner of his mouth raised, as if he had made some sort of decision. He turned his head back and echoed, Junior martial sister's great love, junior martial brother will remember it. If it wasn't for this secluded orchid evening, junior martial brother wouldn't know the person in his heart. Also, junior martial brother senior martial sister Xia's face turned even redder. At this moment, there was a sudden cry of surprise from outside the forest. Then there was a cry of surprise. Senior martial brother Zhao, quickly come and see. Junior martial brother Zhao was taken aback. His face immediately revealed a look of displeasure, and he scolded loudly. What are you shouting for? Lower your voice. Aren't you afraid of attracting the ferocious beasts? Then he said warmly, Senior martial sister, let's go and take a look. Perhaps something has happened. Okay, senior martial sister Xia still hadn't escaped from the mood just now. She lowered her head and replied obediently. Even when she urged the horse forward, she was still absent-minded. Occasionally, she would use her hands to touch her hot cheeks. When junior martial brother Zhao rushed out of the forest, he looked in the direction that the disciple who had long been scared pale pointed. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air, and his face instantly changed color. He saw that in the distance, there was a black mass of blood wolves. At a glance, he couldn't tell the exact number of blood wolves. They were like small squirming black dots, and were rapidly running towards them. Looking at the dust raised by them, could it be that there were thousands of them? Junior martial brother Chen was first shocked, and then carefully looked in the direction that the pack of blood wolves were moving in. It seemed that they weren't moving towards the forest they were in, but should be passing by the forest. Thus his heart calmed down a little, and he whispered, "Don't be noisy, quickly hide in the forest. These blood wolves are just passing by. As long as we are careful not to be discovered by them, we should be fine." The disciple on duty was very puzzled, and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Chin, if we run away now, wouldn't it be better for us to be as far away from the forest as possible?" Senior Marshal Brother Chin angrily said, "What do you know? If we leave, what about the carriage and spiritual herbs here? These are all things that our hall master needs. Even if we have to pay with our lives, we can't lose these things. But if we leave first and wait for the blood wolves to pass by, then we can come back. Isn't it the same?" The disciple still wanted to argue. Senior Marshal Brother Chin was so angry that he laughed. "At this time, if we ride a horse, wouldn't the sound of the horse's hooves be a signal to the blood wolves? But if we leave the horse alone in the forest, what would the horse know? Once the blood wolves pass by, they would have already left their nest. At the same time, they would also attract the blood wolves. We can only stay here with the horse to protect the carriage and spiritual herbs." Then he said, "Quickly, go and inform all the disciples to pull their carriages tightly, and take good care of the horses. Don't let them neigh and attract the blood wolves." Seeing that disciple run into the forest, Junior Marshal Brother Chen reluctantly looked into the forest and whispered, "Senior Marshal Sister Xia, let's go to the back of the forest and see if there are any traces of other ferocious beasts." Senior Marshal Sister Xia was already infatuated, and now that she was panicking, she could only nod blankly and said, "I will listen to Junior Marshal Brother's instructions." Then, the two of them led the horses and slowly walked into the forest. When the disciples in the forest heard the words of the disciple on duty and Senior Brother Chen's order, they hurriedly packed up their things and carefully hid. The disciple who was watching the horse also pulled the horse and used his hand to cover the horse's mouth, afraid that it would make the slightest sound. When Junior Marshal Brother Chen and Senior Marshal Sister Xia led the horses to the back of the forest, there was only silence. Junior Marshal Brother Chen looked around and whispered, "Senior Marshal Sister, tie the horses here." Senior Marshal Sister Xia didn't understand, but she still obediently tied the horses to the tree. After tying the horses, Junior Marshal Brother Chen took Senior Marshal Sister Xia's hand. Senior Marshal Sister Xia was shocked and immediately blushed. She gently withdrew her hand and murmured, "Junior Marshal Brother, although I am in love with you, but you also have to respect me. Even if I am willing, but in broad daylight, and with all the other Senior Marshal brothers, over there, it is really inconvenient." When Junior Marshal Brother Chen heard this, his heart also swayed. He squeezed the smooth little hand in his palm and whispered, "But Senior Marshal Sister Xia knows my feelings. I miss you day and night." Just as Senior Marshal Sister Xia said, "This place is really not cheap. Moreover, the pack of wolves will be here soon. Let's hurry and leave. When we reach a safe place, I will ask." When Senior Marshal Sister Xia heard this, she was shocked and her thoughts faded away. She asked curiously, "Didn't you ask the disciples to hide in the forest? If we don't stay in the forest, where else can we go?" Junior Marshal Brother Chen pulled her hand. "Even if we can hide in the forest, how can it be better than the wilderness over there? If we are not discovered by the pack of wolves, it won't be too late for us to come back. Besides, there are no disciples over there." As he spoke, he had already pulled Senior Marshal Sister Xia and walked far away. Senior Marshal Sister Xia's mind was already in a mess and she followed them. There was not a single sound in the silent forest. Moreover, there were a few birds chirping, which made the forest even more serene. The thousands of blood wolves didn't directly come to this strange forest. They just went far away from the forest and went in another direction. At this moment, 2 long neighs of horses came from the forest, causing the faces of the disciples in the forest to be filled with shock. Chapter 665. 2 horse neighs rang out, causing the faces of all the disciples to turn pale. As for the horses that were already very irritable just now, they were forcefully stopped by the disciples. At this moment, they could no longer endure it. They all let out a li-li-li sound and immediately dug their hooves, wanting to flee far away. "Senior Chen? Where is Senior Xia? Standing behind the tree, the well-hidden tall disciple quickly stood up and asked the patrolling disciple. The disciple looked back in horror and said, "This? I don't know. Senior Chen only asked me to tell you that he himself," without waiting for the disciple to finish speaking. The tall disciple waved his hand and said, "Quick, it's too late. These two horses are probably the horses that the two of them are riding. Disciples, listen up. Ride your horses. If you don't have a horse, you can only use your qinggong. The horse neighing just now will definitely attract the blood wolves. These wolves are not something that we can fight against. Sai, try your best to head east. The other directions are too close to the wolves." After he finished speaking, he jumped up and quickly ran to the tall female disciple who was hiding nearby and shouted, "Quick, get on the horse." Behind him, the patrolling disciple shouted, "Senior Chen asked us to guard this spiritual herb well." How could the tall male disciple respond to him? He reached out and untied the horse on the carriage beside him, and handed the reins to the tall female disciple. That female disciple jumped onto the saddle. Immediately after, a petite disciple behind her shouted, "Senior Xia, wait for me." "Quick, get on." The tall male disciple stretched out his hand and carried the female disciple onto the back of the horse. "What about you? You don't have a horse?" the tall female disciple asked with concern. "Pa." The disciple's palm hit the horse's butt. The horse felt the pain and immediately ran away. Taking advantage of this moment, the tall male disciple used his qinggong and followed behind. He whispered, "Wasn't there a horse neighing just now? I will ride that horse." "All right, go quickly. We will wait for you in front." After saying that, the tall female disciple didn't waste any more time. She shook the reins and led the petite female disciple behind her, urging the horse to move forward. Not long after, all the disciples mounted their horses and rushed out. Even the disciple who was patrolling earlier also followed them. Who would care about the precious medicinal herbs that were left on the horse carriage in the forest? In the distance, the pack of wolves that heard the neighing of the horses suddenly changed their direction and charged towards this nameless little forest. In the forest, the direction in which the disciples were fleeing was the east side of the Yulon Grand Canyon. In the far east, on a steep cliff within a hidden cave, Huangfeng stood quietly for a moment. The silver eye between his brows opened again, and a silver beam of light shot into a corner of the cave. Zhang Xiaohua carried little Martin in his arms and distanced himself from Huangfeng. He had suffered a lot under the silver beam of light, and was still traumatized. He looked at Huangfeng in confusion. When he entered the cave, he had used his divine sense to scan the cave. There was no fluctuation of the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Even when he saw Huangfeng standing there with difficulty, he knew that it would do something. He also used his divine sense to scan the stone wall in front of it again and again, but he still didn't find anything out of the ordinary. However, when the silver beam of light shot straight into the stone wall suddenly changed. First, it was like a stone thrown into water, creating circular ripples. The ripples spread from the center of the stone wall to the entire stone wall. Then, a black dot gradually appeared in the center of the ripples. This black dot grew bigger and bigger as the ripples spread. Finally, it grew to the size of half a person's height and stopped moving. It was actually a door that led to the inside. This. Zhang Xiaohua looked at it from afar, his eyes wide open and his mouth agape. He had been releasing his divine sense all this while, but such a huge commotion was obviously a trick of the immortal Tao. However, his divine sense didn't detect the slightest fluctuation of the yuan qi of heaven and earth. What kind of trick is this? Zhang Xiaohua was extremely depressed. It seemed that as his cultivation increased, the things he encountered became more and more unbelievable. That Huangfeng turned to look at Zhang Xiaohua, then slowly walked in. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to use his divine sense to enter, but the door had the ability to block his divine sense. He couldn't even use his divine sense. When he reached the door and bent down to look inside, he realized that he couldn't even see what was inside. This Huangfeng's trap? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought. He immediately used his divine sense to activate the dragon binding ring. As expected, his divine sense was like a stone thrown into the sea. There was no reaction at all. This made him anxious. At this time, a small head popped out from the door. It was that Huang Feng. It stared at Zhang Xiaohua for a while before shrinking back. It seemed to be urging Zhang Xiaohua. Damn, this little thing actually dares to look down on this Xiaoxia. Zhang Xiaohua stroked the soft little marten in his hand. His courage was immediately boosted. He coughed and slowly walked into the door. The door was very strange. It was similar to the light curtain that Zhang Xiaohua usually used when he used his escape technique. After passing through the door, there was a short walkway in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua could only bend his waist and walk a few steps forward. Soon after, he walked into a bright hall. This hall was much smaller than the one outside, but there were many luminous pearls embedded in the walls. Therefore, even though there was no sunlight, it was still abnormally bright. Once he walked into the hall, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were immediately attracted by everything in front of him. The hall was relatively spacious. There was only a large protrusion on the stone wall at the front. It looked like a platform. At this moment, there was a small black dog lying on the platform. Its size was about the same as the little marten in his hand. Beside the black dog, there were two silver balls. One was very small, about the size of an egg, while the other was extremely large, about the size of a fist. Although these two small balls appeared very small in the large hall, Zhang Xiaohua's gaze was immediately attracted to the silver ball the moment he entered. Moreover, his gaze landed on the silver ball, and he was unwilling to look away for a long time. It was as if the silver ball was able to attract his attention. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua walk in, Huang Feng, who had entered earlier, walked to the bottom of the platform and looked up at the platform. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he forcefully shifted his gaze away from the balls. He raised his hand and controlled the dragon-binding hoop to send Huang Feng onto the platform. Huang Feng climbed onto the platform and walked to the front of the black dog. It lowered its head and sniffed. Then, it growled at Zhang Xiaohua and pointed its paw at the little marten. Following which, it walked to the other side of the platform. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand at first, but when he walked to the front of the black dog and touched it with his hand and listened carefully, he understood. This black dog was like the little marten. Its breathing was very weak and intermittent. Its body was also very cold. If it wasn't for the breathing from its mouth and nose, he would have thought that it was already dead. Needless to say, Huang Feng was definitely thinking about the bottle of stone milk. Zhang Xiaohua shrugged slightly and carefully placed the little marten on the platform. When it saw Zhang Xiaohua being so careful, Huang Feng revealed a gratified expression. Zhang Xiaohua took out the jade bottle, and just like yesterday, he fed a drop of stone milk into the black dog's mouth. Only then did he carry the little marten in his arms. Obviously, this little marten was Zhang Xiaohua's protective talisman. If he didn't carry it, who else would he carry? When it saw Zhang Xiaohua walking away, Huang Feng walked over and lowered its head to take a look. It cupped its beak and nodded at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and waited for Huang Feng's next arrangement. However, he believed that since he had given Huang Feng so many benefits, this intelligent beast wouldn't want his life anymore. Huang Feng lifted its head from the black dog and stared straight at Zhang Xiaohua. It stared at him for nearly the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Zhang Xiaohua felt his hair stand on end from Huang Feng's stare, and almost jumped up. He thought to himself, "What is this bastard trying to do? Your child is in my hands. What are you trying to do?" Huang Feng stared for a while and lowered its head as if it was thinking. After a while, it slowly walked to the two round beads and raised its little paw to point at the larger bead. Then it pointed at Zhang Xiaohua and let out a low growl. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He pointed at the round bead, and then at his own nose. When he saw Huang Feng nodding, Zhang Xiaohua knew that Huang Feng wanted to give the round bead to him. Hence he quickly said politely, "Don't, dear friend. Helping others is the source of happiness. This little brother is only giving away 2 drops of stone milk. It's nothing much. You don't have to be so polite." Even though he said that, he walked to the side of the platform. When it saw Zhang Xiaohua walking over, Huang Feng tactfully pushed the round bead away and took a few steps to the side. The round bead rolled slowly after being pushed by Huang Feng. The platform wasn't big and soon, it would roll to the ground. Zhang Xiaohua saw this and quickly stepped forward to catch it with his left hand. The bead was very light and almost weightless. Zhang Xiaohua reached out to pinch it. It was hard, but he didn't know what it was made of. Very naturally, Zhang Xiaohua took the round bead in front of her eyes and carefully observed it. However, this bead was just a piece of silver, and she couldn't see any clues. Zhang Xiaohua focused her divine sense on this round bead again. However, at this moment, Huang Feng, who was standing on the stage not far away, sneaked a few steps closer while Zhang Xiaohua was picking up the bead. When Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense entered the bead to find out what was going on, Huang Feng immediately flew up like a real yellow wind and blew towards Zhang Xiaohua. Chapter 666. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was just about to enter the round pearl to take a closer look at the mysterious gift that Huang Feng had prepared for her. Then, she felt a gust of wind blow past, and immediately felt that something was amiss. Just as she was about to raise her head, a yellow shadow flashed past her eyes. Following which, she felt a sharp pain in her finger which was holding the round pearl. She saw that the blood was flowing out from her finger. Zhang Xiaohua was enraged and she raised her head to look at Huang Feng, who had just landed on the ground. From Huang Feng's eyes, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to be able to see the mockery in his eyes. Zhang Xiaohua really didn't know what to say. She had always been on guard against Huang Feng's trap, but she never expected that in the end, she would still fall into it. Thinking about the deadly poison on the bodies of the inner and outer court disciples at the entrance of the valley, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was alarmed. Following which, a vicious look appeared in her eyes. Looking at the dragon-binding hoop on Huang Feng's body, her right hand was about to form a seal. However, her right hand was still carrying little Martin, and she couldn't possibly let little Martin die on the ground. Just as she was about to carry little Martin in her arms, Zhang Xiaohua completely didn't notice that the blood on her finger was flowing down her finger, and all of it flowed onto the silver pearl in her hand. As the blood seeped into the pearl, the silver pearl seemed to have a trace of brilliance. That brilliance was extremely faint, then dimmed, then became gentle. Blood also flowed out continuously from the wound on Zhang Xiaohua's finger. Just as Zhang Xiaohua carried little Martin in his arms and was about to form a seal, she inadvertently saw the change in the pearl in her left hand. At this moment, that silver pearl had already emitted a gentle silver light which completely covered Zhang Xiaohua's left hand. Furthermore, the silver light flashed and started to turn slightly like an eye. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and immediately used his divine sense to scan it. Just as his divine sense came into contact with the round pearl, that silver pearl instantly produced a huge attractive force which directly pulled his divine sense into it. At the same time, the left hand which was holding onto the round pearl was similarly sucked in by a force, and all the vital energy in her body flowed into the round pearl in her hand. The round pearl's pull on Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was so violent that in this situation where Zhang Xiaohua was caught off guard, he immediately felt as if the world was spinning, and following which, a splitting pain in his head. After he calmed down a little, he saw a somewhat familiar scene in front of him. A gray space, up, down, left, and right. There was no end in sight. There was no place where light could be seen, but it was still unknown where the light came from, allowing Zhang Xiaohua to see everything around him. Waves of air flowed chaotically, and there was no sound at all. It was dead silent. Suddenly, from a very far end, a very small dot appeared. This dot became bigger and bigger, and in just a few breaths' time, it was so close that its outline could be seen clearly. This was something that Zhang Xiaohua had never seen before. It was a strange thing that seemed to have a life of its own. However, in this gray space, he could not see the size of this thing. It was not right to call it a thing. It was like a squid in the sea. On its seemingly soft and huge body, there was a huge silver eye. And around its body, there were dozens of long tentacles. Oh, those tentacles were swaying slightly in the air, and it was almost impossible to tell how many there were. And at the top of these tentacles, there were silver eyes of different sizes. It was like swimming in the water. The number of tentacles that could not be seen moved slightly, and that thing moved very far away. The distance could not be measured. Zhang Xiaohua could only feel that this distance was really terrifying. All the silver eyes on this thing, except for the biggest one on its body which was wide open, were slightly closed and did not open. That thing moved rapidly, and the silver eyes looked behind it from time to time. There was obvious anxiety and fear in its eyes, as if it was escaping. At this moment, a kind of fluctuation suddenly came. It was a fluctuation that Zhang Xiaohua felt very familiar with. Then in the distance where this thing had just appeared, a bright spot flashed. Then, in just a breath's time, that bright spot was in front of her eyes. It was as fast as light, and the thing in front of her suddenly turned around. All the tentacles on its body fluttered together, and all the silver eyes on its tentacles opened. Just as that bright spot was about to reach its body, all of them shot out a silver brilliance. The huge eye on its body shot out a huge light beam. All the light beams gathered together and collided directly with that bright spot. Like a shocking explosion, the entire gray space was lit up. The brightness was so bright that even Zhang Xiaohua almost had to close her eyes. That bright spot was originally shooting straight at that thing's huge eye. After being obstructed by the light beams, it immediately changed direction and moved slightly to the side. It very neatly cut off 3 of the thing's tentacles of different sizes. At this moment, the huge light beam that collided with the bright spot also changed direction after being reflected by the bright spot. It was almost in the same direction as the bright spot, shooting towards the endless space. Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense was not an exception. It was the first to be sucked in. The bright spot and the 3 tentacles with 3 silver eyes that had just been cut off were also sucked in by the shrinking hole. By the time the thing extended its other tentacles in an attempt to fish something out of the shrinking hole, the hole had already shrunk to the size of a needle. The last scene that Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense saw through the hole was the octopus-like thing. Its huge eyes were filled with terror as its entire body flashed and disappeared. Behind it was another ray of light that calmly streaked across the space that had regained its grayish appearance. Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense was not an exception. It was the first to be sucked in. The bright spot and the 3 tentacles with 3 silver eyes that had just been cut off were also sucked in by the shrinking hole. When the thing extended its other tentacles in an attempt to fish something out of the shrinking hole, the hole had already shrunk to the size of a needle. The last scene that Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense saw through the hole was the octopus-like thing. When Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness entered the hole, it first paused for a moment. Then it rapidly slid into the hole, as if it was falling from the sky. Faster and faster, faster and faster. All the scenery was left behind. Zhang Xiaohua screamed and sat up. His forehead was covered in sweat. As if he had just had a nightmare, Zhang Xiaohua covered his face with both hands and wiped away the sweat on his forehead. Suddenly he seemed to have thought of something and opened his eyes. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he looked at the limp Huangfeng, not far away. He formed a seal, and was about to release it without hesitation. But at this moment, he was shocked to find that there was not a single trace of vital energy in his meridians. At the same time, the intense headache in his head came again. It was the same feeling as when he was deciphering, refining the world, in Rejuvenation Valley, and his consciousness had been depleted by 10 times. Zhang Xiaohua checked again and couldn't help but gasp. His consciousness had been depleted once again. Even the essence of herbalism in his Naiwan palace was so small that it couldn't be any smaller. There was only a tiny bit of it left. This Zhang Xiaohua was really angry. Without hesitation, he drew out the jade water sword and went forward to stab Huangfeng to death. I treated it with all my heart, and even helped it save its child, and the little black puppy. Although these 2 little lives can't be said to be completely saved, but I have tried my best. This little beast actually wants to harm me. And it did it when I saw a rare treasure, and almost completely let my guard down. This, if this spread to the pugilistic world, wouldn't this Xiaoxia's reputation? Zhang Xiaohua gritted his teeth hatefully and stabbed the short sword. But the moment it pierced into Huangfeng's chest, Zhang Xiaohua saw Huangfeng's calm eyes. He even saw the silver eye in between its brows. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Wasn't this the silver eye that he saw in his consciousness earlier? Right, where was the silver bead in his hand earlier? He was so focused on killing Huangfeng that he forgot about it. Xiaoxia, who had fallen into the other party's trap, was obviously enraged and had forgotten the most important thing. Zhang Xiaohua did not keep the jade water sword in his right hand, but raised his left hand instead. The silver bead that was the size of a fist had long disappeared. There was only a crack in the middle of his palm, and that crack opened with great difficulty according to Zhang Xiaohua's will. Then Zhang Xiaohua felt as if he had opened his eyes. It was as if he was extremely sleepy and did not have enough sleep. He was so lazy that he did not want to open his eyes, but he had no choice but to open them slightly. This Zhang Xiaohua almost cried out. Not to mention the strange feeling he had. He actually saw a silver eye that was similar to the one on Huang Feng's forehead in the crack in his left hand. It was just that this eye was several times bigger than Huang Feng's. Then that crack closed tightly. Zhang Xiaohua felt as if he had fallen asleep again. It was as if this was really his third eye, enjoying a sleep that he had never experienced before. Feeling the faint connection between the essence of Dan in his Naiwan palace and the silver eye in his left hand, Zhang Xiaohua very naturally kept the jade water sword that was pointed at Huang Feng's chest. Zhang Xiaohua knew that this was a gift from Huang Feng to him, but the way he gave it to him was a little too strange. When you give it to me, can't you give me a heads up? If not for this Xiaoxia's attentiveness, wouldn't I have killed the innocent just now? Oh, you can't be considered innocent either. That was what Zhang Xiaohua thought. He directly threw the matter of Huang Feng, not knowing how to speak to the back of his mind. Chapter 667. At this moment, the main hall was incomparably quiet. Only the ragged breathing of Huang Feng, who was lying in the corner, could be heard from time to time beside Zhang Xiaohua's ears. Zhang Xiaohua formed a hand seal and sent it to the top of the stage. She smiled and said, "Old man, you're clearly in poor health, yet you still force yourself to fly. Do you really think you're the wind?" And Huang Feng had been upgraded from brother to old man from Zhang Xiaohua's mouth. It had to be said that this gift was indeed impressive. As she spoke, Zhang Xiaohua took the little marten out of her embrace. This little fellow really liked Zhang Xiaohua's warm embrace. When it was taken out, it stretched out its little paws, as if it was looking for something to stay. It also smacked its lips in dissatisfaction. Zhang Xiaohua shrugged and placed the little marten beside Huang Feng. She thought to herself, "This Xiaoxia is not a wet nurse. There's nothing to feed you." Huang Feng raised its head and licked the little marten beside it. It then walked with difficulty to the little black dog's side. It nudged the little black dog with its mouth and pointed at it with its paws, then at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She also pointed at the little black dog, then at her own nose. That Huang Feng nodded. Zhang Xiaohua was not happy. She shook her head vigorously and said, "Old man, you should take care of them yourself. Taking care of one child is the same as taking care of two children. You'll slowly get used to it. Don't make me do such a difficult task." That Huang Feng acted as if it did not hear her. It walked to the other silver eye and looked at Zhang Xiaohua. It used its paws to point at the round pearl, then at the little black dog. This time, Zhang Xiaohua understood. It meant to give this silver pearl to the little black dog. However, this did not seem to have anything to do with her. After she left, "You can give it to whoever you want. Even if you secretly gave it to your little marten." She would not tell Black Lightning. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua understood but did not nod, Huang Feng continued to ignore her. Then it walked to its child and looked at it lovingly for a long time. It was so long that Zhang Xiaohua muttered, "What is this old man doing? Why isn't he resting?" Just when Zhang Xiaohua was getting impatient, Huang Feng let out a low growl and closed its eyes for a long time. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of its mouth. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and quickly stopped it. "Old man, please don't torture yourself. You are already suffering from internal injuries." Before she finished speaking, the silver eye between Huang Feng's brows suddenly opened. Then a ball of silver light appeared. It was as if a silver moon had risen into the sky. The silver eye rose from Huang Feng's brows and slowly flew towards little marten. Then, it stuck to the narrow space between little marten's brows. Huang Feng moved to the front of little marten with difficulty, and used its paws to draw across little marten's brows. Then it immediately pressed down on the silver eye. Then, the silver eye retracted into little Martin's forehead. When the silver light disappeared into little Martin's forehead, the silver eye also disappeared and a long and narrow mark appeared between little Martin's brows. I see. Zhang Xiaohua involuntarily stretched out her left hand and looked at the mark on her palm. Sigh, I pity all parents. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and turned to look at Huang Feng. At this moment, Huang Feng looked abnormally weak. Although there was not much change between its brows, there was still a trace of blood at the corner of its mouth. Removing the silver eye from its body must have caused it great harm. Zhang Xiaohua was about to persuade it to rest again when Huang Feng let out a low growl again. However, this time, it seemed to be lacking in energy. Then, Huang Feng made an extremely strange posture. Then, it opened its mouth and a small pearl emitting a faint white light flew out from its mouth. And what is this? Zhang Xiaohua was very curious. This Huang Feng had quite a number of pearls on its body. That pearl flew into the air and spun around, emitting a faint white light. In this hall, it was more dazzling than all the other luminous pearls. It was like a full moon hanging in the sky. It seems a little familiar. Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself, but I've never seen it before. At this moment, Huang Feng waved its little paw again and signaled to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and immediately walked forward. She saw Huang Feng pointing at the black puppy and then at the little Martin. Zhang Xiaohua was very confused and asked, "You want me to share this with them?" Huang Feng shook its head. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and stretched out her hand to place the black puppy and the little Martin beside Huang Feng. Huang Feng nodded. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "The two of us are cooperating more and more well." Huang Feng seemed to understand and the corners of its mouth curled into a smile. Then it pointed at the pearl and waved its paw. There was no need for further explanation. Zhang Xiaohua understood. He reached into his robes and pulled out the jade water sword. Then he slashed at the pearl with all his might. With a crisp paw sound, the bead was immediately split into two halves. At this moment, another poo sound was heard and Huang Feng spat out a large mouthful of blood. This Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Just now, the silver pupil had a trace of blood flowing out. Why was this so serious? Huang Feng did not dare to delay. With a wave of its two paws, the two halves of the pearl flew in front of the black puppy and the little Martin. Huang Feng used its paw to grab the pearl and pressed it against the abdomen of the two little beasts. Then it seemed to be mumbling something and let out a low growl. Following that, it spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. The pearl in its paw immediately dimmed. Then Huang Feng's two paws emitted an extremely bright light. It was so bright that Zhang Xiaohua closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, the light had disappeared and the pearl in Huang Feng's paw had also disappeared. Following that, a large amount of blood flowed out from Huang Feng's mouth and dyed the yellow fur on its chest red. Then, Huang Feng turned its head with difficulty and stretched out its two paws again. It pointed at the two little beasts and nodded at Zhang Xiaohua with difficulty. Before Zhang Xiaohua could ask what it meant, Huang Feng lay on its back. Its two paws were still stretched out, but this time, it was pointing at the sky. Io! Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and hurried forward. He did not care if there were any traps in Huang Feng's mouth and nose. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. It turned out that Huang Feng was no longer breathing. It was dead. However, its two large black eyes were still open, and its two small claws were still stretched straight towards the sky. Gosh, Zhang Xiaohua was at a loss. He did not expect that Huang Feng would die at this time. This was an old monster that had harmed the fragrance cult for so many years. From what Lu Lihong and the others said, it had already ruined the peaceful orchid dusk refinement during the previous generation. How could it die so easily? Furthermore, didn't Huang Feng just give birth to a little Huang Feng? Life was so beautiful and the joy of family was right in front of it. How could it bear to leave? I don't understand. Zhang Xiaohua shook his head in confusion. That's right. Although Huang Feng was weak before, ever since he consumed the stone milk, his mental state had improved significantly. The name 10,000-year stone milk was not just for show. In the future, Who will be able to harm the fragrance cult? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly had such a strange thought. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. Thinking of Yellow Wind's last action, how could Zhang Xiaohua not know what it meant when it nodded at him? It was still pointing at the two little animals a moment ago, but now it was pointing at the air with its claws. Entrusting two ferocious little beasts to him. Do I have the potential to be a nanny? Zhang Xiaohua shrugged helplessly. Although the sudden death of Huang Feng shocked him, in Zhang Xiaohua's heart, there was only a trace of sadness. After all, Huang Feng had just died under the claws of tens, or even hundreds of thousands of fragrance cult disciples. Even Zhang Xiaohua himself was almost killed by this thing. Therefore, when he saw Huang Feng entrusting the two little beasts to him, he could not help but feel that it was rather absurd. Can't you wait for these two little things to grow up before you die? Zhang Xiaohua thought in his heart, but he looked at little Martin who was sleeping soundly at the side. Suddenly, his face was obviously startled. Then, it turned into an expression of disbelief. Zhang Xiaohua had been surprised too many times today. He could even change the expression on his face with ease. Zhang Xiaohua put his hand on little Martin's mouth and nose in amazement, and then stroked little Martin's fur. At this moment, little Martin's breathing was no longer weak and intermittent. Its breathing was smooth, and its heartbeat was strong. It was no different from an ordinary little beast. Even its body was warm and cozy. He then put his hand on little black puppy's body, and listened to its heartbeat. Indeed, it was the same as little Martin. Its vitality was strong, and it was completely different from its previous state of being on the verge of death. If Zhang Xiaohua had not seen it with his own eyes, he would never have imagined that the little bead that Huang Feng spat out was actually so big. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua understood how Huang Feng died. This bead was obviously something very important to it, something that concerned its life. However, for its boy, and for little black puppy, it did not hesitate to spit out the bead, and gave the hope of life to its child. Then it resolutely turned and walked towards death. Could it be that it had already made its preparations when we were at the pool? Zhang Xiaohua's nose turned sour. A mother's love was greater than the heavens. No matter if it was a mother of a human or a mother of a beast, they all had the same motherly love. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua's hatred towards Huang Feng disappeared without a trace along with this feeling. Chapter 668. Yellow Wind's body was still warm and soft. Zhang Xiaohua walked over, and placed its claws on its chest. She whispered, I don't know if you know that you have the name Yellow Wind. I don't know how to address you, but don't worry. Leave your boy to me. I will raise him well. Oh, right, your child. Does he drink milk? Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head. She hadn't seen Yellow Wind feeding its child for the past few days. What did it eat? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the black puppy and said, Since this black puppy is entrusted to me, I can only accept it. Don't worry, I will do my best to raise them and teach them to have dreams and ambitions. Speaking of this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Yellow Wind and Black Lightning have harmed the fragrance cult for many years. When these two little beasts grow up, they must have their mother's magical powers. Could I use this to threaten the fragrance cult? Heh. If the fragrant cult makes this young hero unhappy, I'll immediately have these two little things vent my anger for this young master. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Yellow Wind's open eyes and slowly closed them. Don't worry, old man. I have said everything that needs to be said. If you die with your eyes open, it will be very stressful for me. However, as soon as Zhang Xiaohua let go of his hand, Huang Feng's eyes immediately opened again. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and said, It can't be right? What are you worried about? Oh, right, I will find a place with good feng shui to bury you and Black Lightning. I will let you rest in peace. I will let you be good friends in life, and be neighbors in death. What do you think? Why aren't you closing your eyes? Sigh, I will raise your little Yellow Wind as my own son. That should be fine, right? After saying that, Zhang Xiaohua closed its eyes. This time, it was able to close its eyes in peace. Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. This beast was already dead. How could it still hear? Was she really going to raise this little Martin as her own son? Was she going to give it the surname Zhang? However, looking at the little marten who was still sleeping soundly, and did not know that it had lost its only family member in the world, Zhang Xiaohua felt a wave of pity. In this world, perhaps she was the only person it could rely on. Sigh. Zhang Xiaohua continued to sigh. She turned around and walked out from the hole in the mountain wall. She brought the corpse of Black Lightning whose stomach had been cut open, and died a horrible death into this secret cave. Looking around, she found a place with soft soil and used the jade water sword to dig 2 small holes. Although it was very inconvenient to use the jade water sword to dig 2 small holes, even though she did not have a single drop of essential qi in her meridians, and could not force out the sword ray of the jade water sword, Zhang Xiaohua still carefully and methodically dug the 2 small holes. Following that, she carefully placed Yellow Wind and Black Lightning into the holes. She thought for a moment, and recalled the scene when her grandmother passed away. She stood up and walked to the platform. She carried the 2 little beasts who were sleeping soundly, and placed them in front of their respective mothers. She said softly, "2 little things, your mothers are about to be buried in peace. I believe you have not seen them since you were born, right?" But the 2 little things still had their eyes tightly shut and did not move. Zhang Xiaohua was helpless. She opened their eyes and let them take a look. The 2 little beasts were extremely impatient and shook their heads slightly, expressing their extreme indignation. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and let go of her hands. No matter what, she had to let them take a look. After burying Yellow Wind and Black Lightning, Zhang Xiaohua raised 2 small bumps on the ground. Then, she used the jade water sword to write the words Wind and Lightning in front of their respective graves so that they could be separated. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua lifted the 2 little beasts' heads and lightly knocked them on the ground 3 times to express their respective etiquette as boy. The 2 little fellows whined and did not have the slightest awareness of bidding farewell to their loved ones. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua stood up and patted the dirt off her hands. She looked left and right. At this moment, the hall was empty and there was nothing left. The only thing left was the last silver eye on the platform. Zhang Xiaohua walked over and took it, putting it into her purse. This thing was left behind by Black Lightning for the black puppy. It was also entrusted by Yellow Wind. Zhang Xiaohua would not take it for herself. Finally, Zhang Xiaohua walked in front of the graves of Yellow Wind and Black Lightning. Finally, he lowered his head in silence for a moment before saying, "Elders, especially Black Lightning, I've never seen you alive. Although you died without knowing why, but you had Yellow Wind to avenge you. In this Yulon Grand Canyon, there were hundreds and thousands of disciples of the incense cult who were buried with you. I didn't know the grudge between you and the incense cult. Now that you're dead, you can die in peace. I will be taking your 2 children away. When they become successful in the future and become outstanding, oh, beasts, I will bring them back to see you." After she finished speaking, she bowed and carried the 2 little beasts. Still holding one in each hand, she turned around and left the hall. Looking at the hole that was still rotating, Zhang Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. It had been a long time since this thing was sealed. If she did not seal it, her heart would not be at ease. But how would she seal it? How would he know? After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua stretched out her left hand and exposed the crack. Then she imagined opening the eye. However, the eye seemed to be extremely tired. It was not until Zhang Xiaohua exhausted the little bit of consciousness that she had painstakingly accumulated from the Dan Xian in her Naiwan Gong that the silver eye slightly opened a slit. She saw a faintly discernible silver light shoot out and hit the hole. Then the hole rotated in the opposite direction and slowly closed. In a moment, it returned to its original appearance, an ordinary stone wall. And Zhang Xiaohua once again felt a burst of exhaustion in her heart. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. It seemed that it was not the right time to immediately go out. Placing the 2 little beasts to the side, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and took out 2 primordial stones. She began to absorb the energy from them. However, after circulating his qi for a while, Zhang Xiaohua discovered a strange phenomenon. Half of the qi of heaven and earth that he absorbed actually passed through the meridians in his body, and was directly sent to his left hand, where it was absorbed by the silver eye hidden in his palm. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua began to practice God's guidance, wanting to replenish the consumed consciousness. But she immediately discovered that the consciousness was even worse than the vital energy. It was directly absorbed by the silver eye, and her own Dan Xian did not replenish the slightest bit. Well, this is good. Not only do I have to take care of these two little ones, I also have something that needs to consume vital energy and consciousness. Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. She did not have any good ideas. Her consciousness could only cover a range of 10 feet in the fragrance cult. Now it was even better. Only 10 feet was left. 10 feet it is. It's better than nothing. Zhang Xiaohua stood up and carried the two little beasts in each hand. She was about to walk out of the cave. Looking at the cave that led to the cliff, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. She had an idea in her mind. She carefully placed the little marten in her bosom, then used her vital energy to knock down the stone walls around the entrance of the cave, blocking the entrance. Only then did she form a seal, and directly flew out of the cave to the top of the mountain. At this time, it was already afternoon. Zhang Xiaohua followed Huang Feng into the cave for only a few hours. But in these few hours, so many things happened that Zhang Xiaohua was somewhat overwhelmed. Looking at the sun in the west, Zhang Xiaohua roughly determined the direction. She floated down the mountain and directly flew towards the south. Zhang Xiaohua began to flee from the entrance of the Yulon Grand Canyon. She only wanted to avoid the sharp claws of Huang Feng, so she did not have the time to determine the direction. At this time, she did not know where she was or where she was in the Yulon Grand Canyon. Either way, the entrance of the Yulon Grand Canyon was in the south. But at this time, her consciousness was weak, and her vital energy was also lacking. Imperial Wind Technique? Then she did not need to use it. She could only use the ethereal steps and levitation technique. Although it was only a movement technique, Zhang Xiaohua was not much slower than the inner disciples of the lingering fragrance peak. Not long after, she was already far away from the mountain peak where Black Lightning resided and arrived at a desolate forest. The forest in the Yulon Grand Canyon was lush with vegetation. It was rare to see a desolate forest like this. However, Zhang Xiaohua did not mind and did not have the slightest intention to avoid it. She leaped onto a tree in the forest and with a few leaps, she headed towards the depths of the forest. While walking, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stopped. She patted her forehead and said to herself, I was just thinking about something and seem to have forgotten something. Now that I think about it, there are so many luminous pearls in the cave. Black Lightning and Yellow Wind are not needed anymore. How could I forget to take them? This brat did not have the slightest awareness of an expert in xiaoxia. You have so many precious herbs in your belt. Which one of them is not more valuable than the luminous pearl? Zhang Xiaohua looked back at the path she just took and shrugged her shoulders. Forget it, it's a bit far to go back. Let's talk about it again when I bring Little Black back to pay respects to its mother. Well, in just a few hours, she had already given Little Black a name. But it was really vulgar. Little Black. Little Black, don't blame me. The space in my bosom is really limited. If I put Little Yellow in, I won't be able to put you. Little Yellow was born with my eyes. You don't have to care too much about the distance. And Little Marten will be called Little Yellow. After comforting Little Black in her hands, Zhang Xiaohua looked up at the sun in the sky. Fortunately, the direction was not off. Just as she was about to start moving, she suddenly heard the roars of beasts in the forest. Then she heard a scream. It was a woman's scream. Chapter 669. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised to hear the roar of the beasts and the scream of a woman. Didn't the disciples of the fragrant religion already leave the Yulon Grand Canyon? Could it be that there were still disciples here? However, the situation at this time was already critical. Listening to the movement, it seemed that several fierce beasts were besieging a female disciple. If it was an inner disciple, then it would definitely be silently hunted down. Needless to say, it was definitely an inner disciple like Zhang Pinger. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua held Little Black in her left hand and the jade water in her right hand. She leapt towards the place where the beasts were roaring. Zhang Xiaohua's qinggong was excellent. Although the beasts were not close, she arrived in front of them in a moment. Under a withered tree, a petite woman was holding a long sword. She was struggling to deal with 4 white bears with their bloody mouths wide open. Although the woman's swordsmanship was exquisite, she was facing the famous white bears of the Yulon Grand Canyon. If it was just 1 or 2 of them, she might be able to escape with her life. However, the white bears had blocked all her escape routes. There was no room for her to dodge. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the scene, she was already in imminent danger. Zhang Xiaohua shouted, "Senior sister, don't be anxious. Hold on a little longer." After she finished speaking, she quickly jumped down. Holding the jade water, she stabbed the nearest white bear. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have enough true qi and could not casually use the jade water sword light, her qinggong was exquisite and her strength was boundless. She was the nemesis of the white bears. After a few head-on clashes, she repelled the white bear. Finding a gap, she stabbed the white bear's chest. The white bear cried out in pain. Blood gushed out and it collapsed on the ground. When the other 3 white bears saw this, they roared. They abandoned the female disciple and rushed towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua did not panic. She used the ethereal steps to fight the 3 white bears with ease. However, when she saw Zhang Xiaohua executing the ethereal steps so proficiently, a look of astonishment surfaced on the pale face of the female disciple who was already petrified. When she saw Zhang Xiaohua's face again, a look of pleasant surprise and disbelief immediately surfaced on her face as a blush appeared on her face. Zhang Xiaohua, who was fighting bitterly, held Little Black in one hand and the jade water in the other. She found an opportunity to kill a white bear. Seeing 2 of their companions die, the remaining 2 white bears retreated. They turned and ran towards the depths of the forest. Although the white bears ran clumsily, Zhang Xiaohua did not chase them. She stood there and waited until the white bears were far away. Then she turned around and smiled. "Senior sister, are you hurt?" The petite female disciple stared at Zhang Xiaohua and looked at her again and again. Finally she probed, "Are you Zhang Xiaohua?" Zhang Xiaohua. When this familiar name came out of the female disciple's mouth, it gave Zhang Xiaohua fright. She almost wanted to kill her. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's surprise, the female disciple probed again. I'm Chen Chen. Chen Chen from the Misty School's Mingsui Hall. Do you still remember? Ah? Zhang Xiaohua's mouth opened wide. She really did not expect that her luck would explode. She actually met Chen Chen here. Together with the little senior sister, who followed behind senior sister Chang'e. When Zhang Xiaohua reacted, the first thing she said was, "Where's my second brother, Zhang Xiaohu? Is he still alive?" Chen Chen was also stunned. She just probed and could not confirm that the young man in front of her was the same as Zhang Xiaohua for years ago. She did not expect that Zhang Xiaohua would ask such a question. Seeing that Chen Chen did not speak, an ominous premonition rose from the bottom of her heart. She trembled and said, "Is my second brother? Is he? Tell me, is it the Xiangism, the Dalan Temple, or the Righteous Alliance?" Then she gritted her teeth and said, "I will let them use the blood of the whole gang to comfort my second brother's soul in heaven." Zhang Xiaohua was so excited that Chen Chen quickly waved her hand and said, "Senior brother is very good. Zhang Xiaohua, Zhang Xiaohu is still alive. We were just together." Ah! Zhang Xiaohua was so happy that she grabbed Chen Chen's hand and said, "Is my second brother still alive? Ha 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 ha, senior sister. Why didn't you say so earlier? My heart is beating so fast that it can't stop thumping." Chen Chen chuckled and said, "Don't mention it. It's all because of your impatience. You guessed before I finished speaking." Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, "By the way, where is my second brother? Wasn't he with you just now?" Hearing this, Chen Chen's face became serious again and said, "We were picking herbs here and accidentally ran into a pack of blood wolves." Pack of blood wolves. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. Before Chen Chen finished, she asked sharply, "What about my second brother?" Chen Chen cried and said, "Senior brother and senior sister were with me. But seeing that the horse was exhausted and couldn't run anymore, they left me in the tree hole here and rode the horse to lead the pack of blood wolves to other places." Zhang Xiaohua was anxious. She knew how powerful the blood wolves were, not to mention the pack of blood wolves. She immediately shouted, In which direction did they go? Chen Chen pointed to the north and said, "It should be in that direction." Okay. Zhang Xiaohua heard and turned to leave. But Chen Chen dragged her and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, although you are good at martial arts, you are still far behind senior brother and senior sister. If you go like this, won't you die in vain?" Zhang Xiaohua patted her forehead and stretched out her hand to draw a big circle under the big withered tree, which surrounded Chen Chen in the middle. Then, she threw out several jade talismans and made an incantation to cast the inhibition. She shouted, "Chen Chen, you sit in this circle and don't take a step out. I'm going to save them, and we'll be back in a while." After that, she stuffed Little Black in her hand into Chen Chen's arms and made an incantation. She flew up with the wind and went straight to the sky in the north. This Chen Chen held the black puppy that Zhang Xiaohua stuffed into her arms with one hand, and reached out to grab Zhang Xiaohua's clothes with the other hand. But when she saw Zhang Xiaohua flying to the sky, she almost screamed. Then she covered her small mouth with her hand, and was stunned on the spot. Until Zhang Xiaohua flew out of sight, Chen Chen rubbed her eyes. If it wasn't for the black puppy in her arms, she would have thought that she was having a good dream. She looked at the roars of wild beasts in the distance, and looked at the circle that Zhang Xiaohua had just drawn. Thinking of Zhang Xiaohua's advice, Chen Chen felt endless confidence for no reason. She sat down cross-legged and leisurely stroked Little Black in her arms. She smiled and whispered to herself, "This Zhang Xiaohua is really mysterious. I heard senior brother say that he most likely died at the hands of the Tenryu sect. Why did we suddenly appear in the Chuanxiang cult? And he has such a remarkable ability. What kind of mysterious martial arts is this?" North of the wild forest, on a high slope, a pack of thousands of blood wolves was surrounding two people, a man and a woman. The man was tall and held a long sword in his hand. He was trying his best to resist the blood wolves that were pouncing on him. The female disciple who was standing back to back with him also held a long sword. However, one of her arms had been broken, and was hanging limply. Blood was constantly flowing out of her shoulder. The long sword in her hand had slowed down, and the strength of her stab was also weak. Not far from the high slope, there was a wolf king with golden fur. It was 3 times the size of a normal blood wolf, and was standing there leisurely. It was interested in watching the unyielding struggle of the two people in front of it. Thousands of blood wolves were quietly surrounding them. Only 4 or 5 blood wolves were surrounding the two disciples, and were constantly attacking. 2 blood wolves pounced on the female disciple. The sword in her hand flashed and split into 2. However, the blood wolf on the left opened its mouth and bit the long sword that was already weak. The blood wolf on the side took the opportunity to open its mouth and bite the female disciple's arm. It raised its head, and the female disciple screamed as a piece of flesh was torn from her arm. Her hand loosened, and the blood wolf snatched the sword away. The female disciple's legs went soft and she fell to the ground. Feeling the person behind him fall, the male disciple was shocked and shouted, Changgu, are you all right?" He was anxious to see that he could not turn around to look. He only heard the female disciple gasping for breath and said, "Xiaohuai, I'm afraid I can't hold on. You use your qinggong to escape." This man and woman were actually Zhang Xiaohu and Changgu. When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he looked at the endless pack of wolves and said with a smile, "Changgu, don't talk about the thousands of blood wolves. I can't even run away. Even if I could, do you think I would leave you behind?" Xiaohu Changgu was moved and said, "Actually, along the way, you had the chance to escape. It's just that for me you followed." "Don't say that, Changgu. My martial arts are limited. Don't I still need you as a senior sister to protect me? I'm looking for you to protect me." "AI, don't say these words to make me feel at ease. Others may not know, but do you think I don't know? Although you entered the sect late and missed the best opportunity to practice martial arts, your aptitude is top-notch. Not to mention your swordsmanship, even your attainments in the ethereal divine art have improved significantly. Even I, as your senior sister, am envious. Even sect leader O would be surprised if he saw your aptitude. If it weren't for the great changes in the sect, otherwise." Senior sister Zhang Xiaohu wanted to continue but was stopped by Changgu. she said. Xiaohu, don't speak first. Wait for me to finish. I don't have much time left. There are many things I haven't told you. I know that you're still working hard on martial arts in order to revive the ethereal divine art. So, I don't dare to disturb you. Ouch, Zhang Xiaohu screamed. It seemed that he was bitten by a blood wolf. Changgu immediately asked, Xiaohu, where are you hurt? Zhang Xiaohu laughed and said, It's nothing, Changgu. It's just a superficial wound. It won't get in the way. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohu said in a warm voice, Changgu, actually, I've always wanted to tell you. Chapter 670. Since Changgu was bitten by 2 blood wolves and collapsed on the ground, the 2 blood wolves threw their swords on the ground and stood far away, no longer moving forward. However, the 3 blood wolves that Zhang Xiaohu was facing were still tirelessly pouncing on him, making Zhang Xiaohu unable to deal with them. Not far away, the Wolf King with golden fur seemed to be very interested in appreciating everything that happened before. I have always wanted to tell you, Changgu. Zhang Xiaohua said while facing the enemies. I don't know if you want to hear it or not, but if I don't say it today, I may not have the chance to say it in the future. Changgu endured the pain and said shyly, I know, Xiaohu, this may be God's arrangement. God knows my feelings and wants us to hear each other's hearts in our last moments in this world. You say it. Changgu. Zhang Xiaohu took a deep breath. It seemed that this sentence was more difficult than dealing with the 3 blood wolves. What's wrong with you? Although Changgu had lost a lot of blood, her face was still a little red. Zhang Xiaohu finally said the words that he had kept in his heart for 4 years. Changgu, I want to marry you. Seeing that Changgu behind him did not speak, Zhang Xiaohu was a little panicked. When he was about to ask again, he was inadvertently bitten by a blood wolf. Ouch. Zhang Xiaohu could not help but cry out. Hearing Zhang Xiaohu's scream, Changgu's heart ached and she immediately replied, Xiaohu, I am willing. In fact, this is also what I want to say to you. I know. I am your senior sister and should not have feelings for you. But your shadow is deeply engraved in my heart. I can't forget you no matter what. Misty Hall. Although other disciples confessed to me, I rejected them all. I was waiting for you. Zhang Xiaohu also endured the pain and laughed. What senior sister? You are a few months younger than me. This is what you told me. Don't forget, you don't know, Changgu. I have liked you for a long time. As early as when we were still in the Misty School, I was thinking about you. However, I knew that my martial arts were low, so I did not dare to confess to you. I only practiced martial arts so that I could ask for your hand in marriage when I succeeded in martial arts. Moreover, when you told me your birth characters, I also knew your thoughts. So from then on, I practiced martial arts with more vigor. I knew, as long as I succeeded in martial arts, you would definitely be my wife. Even if the Misty School was destroyed, even if I was humiliated by the fragrance cult at Shirxing Peak, I still believed that I want to be with my wife. Changgu. Behind him, Changgu blushed and murmured, Xiaohu, I am willing to be your wife forever, forever. At this time, a voice came from afar. Second brother. Second brother, Changgu murmured again. Hey, someone is calling second brother. Xiaohu, is it you? Zhang Xiaohu did not have time to listen. He just smiled bitterly and said, the only one who can call me second brother is Xiaohua. Poor Xiaohua. I don't know where she is or whether she is alive. Oh, Changgu was a little confused now. She whispered, Xiaohu, my husband, if I knew this day would come, I would have asked the hall master to make a decision for me. What senior sister? Junior brother. I just want to be your wife, me too. Changgu, I should have asked the master to make a decision for me. Alas, Changgu, my wife, I didn't marry you in this life. In the next life, I will marry you. Yes, in the next life. Maybe later on let a wolf eat us all. We can't sleep on the same pillow when we are alive, but can be buried in a grave when we die. Zhang Xiaohu's heart ached for no reason. The blood wolf in front of him took advantage of the gap and bit off the sword in his hand. The other blood wolf also took advantage of the opportunity to bite his thigh. Immediately, a piece of flesh was bitten off, dripping with blood. Zhang Xiaohu sighed and threw out the broken sword. Unexpectedly, it did not even hurt the blood wolf's fur. At this time he heard Chang'e murmur, "Xiaohu, my husband. I am cold, you hold. Hold me." Zhang Xiaohu did not hesitate. He turned around and sat on the ground. He hugged Chang'e and said, "Chang'e, I will hold you. I will hold you for a lifetime." Chang'e raised her little face and said shyly, "Xiaohu, kiss me. I haven't tasted the taste of a kiss yet." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu's heart ached again. He leaned over and kissed Chang'e's pale cherry lips. At this moment, a voice came from afar, "Second brother. Second brother. Where are you?" I am a pighead. Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohu, where are you?" Zhang Xiaohu? Who called me? Zhang Xiaohu was a little impatient. "You can call me at any time. Why do you have to call me now?" Zhang Xiaohu still leaned over. But just as he was about to kiss Chang'e's red lips, he suddenly reacted in his heart. This person is called Zhang Xiaohu. Second brother, isn't that Zhang Xiaohua? Xiaohua. Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohu raised his head and shouted, "I am here." However, when Zhang Xiaohu raised his head, he immediately saw the surrounding blood wolves slapping his face. Chang'e opened her eyes slightly and said in confusion, Why are you hitting yourself?" Zhang Xiaohu smiled bitterly. Listening to the voice just now, it seemed to be Xiaohua's, but we are surrounded by wolves. If I agree, won't I have to call Xiaohua? If we die, but we have to implicate Xiaohua. His parents at home probably don't know that he is still alive. And Chang'e understood Zhang Xiaohu's idea. She said, "Quickly tell him to go back. Don't come over. He may not know that there are wolves here." Therefore, Zhang Xiaohu immediately raised his head and shouted, "Wolf pack, there is a blood wolf pack here. I don't care if you are little flower or not. Don't come over. Run as far as you can. Don't come over." At this time, a cry of surprise came from afar. "Second brother, why are you here? Wait for me. I will be there soon." The voice was still far away, but when the voice landed, it was already close by. Chang'e muttered, "Xiaohu, look. The god is here, we are saved." After saying that, she fainted in Zhang Xiaohu's arms. Zhang Xiaohu was concerned about Chang'e. After shouting, he looked at Chang'e. That person's voice was not familiar, and he was far away. Even if he came over, he and Chang'e had already prepared food for the blood wolves. When he heard Chang'e's words, he unconsciously looked up. Sure enough, from the distant sky, a tall and thin young man with fluttering clothes flew over. In just a few breaths, he was above the pack of blood wolves. Looking at the young man's face, he was Zhang Xiaohua from 4 years ago. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohu was stunned. "Ah, this is flying." At this time, the Wolf King not far away seemed to be tired of the tragedy of life and death. It opened its mouth and let out a long howl. The few blood wolves that had stopped just now roared and pounced towards Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e. Zhang Xiaohua, who was flying in the air, saw his second brother and Chang'e lying on the ground, covered in blood. He was already heartbroken. When he saw the blood wolves pouncing towards them, he was even more furious. He threw Chasing Dream towards the nearest blood wolf. At the same time, he landed beside Zhang Xiaohu like lightning. Once Chasing Dream was thrown out, it was like a dragon in the sea. The blood wolf that was pouncing towards Zhang Xiaohu did not even have time to react. With a poochie sound, the Chasing Dream drilled into its mouth and came out from the back of its head. After that, it made a turn and flew towards another blood wolf. In the blink of an eye, 3 blood wolves were lying in a pool of blood. Zhang Xiaohua landed on the ground and was not in a hurry to chase after the blood wolves. He quickly took out a few jade talismans and placed them around Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e. Then he formed a seal to protect the two of them. The sober Zhang Xiaohu at the side felt that he was already in a daze. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua doing what Zhang Xiaohua did, he did not understand what was going on. However, the small sword, which was like a hidden weapon, was able to easily kill the 3 blood wolves that he had been fighting for a long time. This already made him feel a little relieved. Looking at the Blood Wolf King again, seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had easily killed the 3 blood wolves, it immediately became excited. With a low growl, more than 10 blood wolves pounced. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly shouted, Xiaohua, there are thousands of blood wolves here. You can't deal with them. Your qinggong is good. If you can fly, then fly away, or take Chang'e away. Zhang Xiaohua turned back and smiled. Don't worry, second brother. Since I'm here, I won't let anything in this world hurt you and second sister-in-law. Then pausing for a moment, she said word by word. Since these blood wolves injured second brother and second sister-in-law, then let them know some people are not to be hurt so easily. Before she finished speaking, she pointed her finger, and Chasing Dream let out a light cry. Not long later, more than 10 blood wolves were killed. Following that, more blood wolves swarmed over. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes flashed with anger. Taking out a piece of yuan stone, she absorbed yuan qi while killing the blood wolves. Not long later, more than 100 blood wolves died under Chasing Dream's sword. Zhang Xiaohu, who was initially sitting on the ground, saw this and could not help but feel his blood boil. Standing up, he smiled and said, "Awesome, awesome. It's a pity that second brother's sword is broken. Otherwise, I would also kill the wolves side by side with you." Seeing her second brother stand up, Zhang Xiaohua was in a good mood and asked, "Second brother's injuries are not a problem?" "No problem, your second brother's physique is very good." "Good." Saying that, Zhang Xiaohua passed the jade water sword to Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Then second brother will use this sword." Zhang Xiaohu took the jade water sword and used his hand to make a few strokes. Smiling, he said, "This sword is very light." Then he slashed at a blood wolf that Zhang Xiaohua had released. The sword pierced the blood wolf's neck and with a qi sound, it went through. He could not help but exclaim, "Good sword, good sword." Then he let loose and fought with a few blood wolves that Zhang Xiaohua had intentionally released. As he stabbed, he said, "Second brother's original sword could not even pierce through the skin of these blood wolves. If I had this sword earlier, second brother would have been able to kill a few more blood wolves." Chapter 671. Zhang Xiaohu easily killed a few blood wolves in front of him. His confidence was immediately boosted. With a soft whistle, he raised his sword and stabbed at the other blood wolves. The first few blood wolves had underestimated Zhang Xiaohu, and were easily killed by him. The next few blood wolves were more cautious. They moved around and used all kinds of methods. Zhang Xiaohu's jade water sword could not easily succeed. Hence, Zhang Xiaohu also calmed down and displayed his exquisite swordsmanship. He fought with the blood wolves released by Zhang Xiaohua. Although Zhang Xiaohua used his divine senses to control Chasing Dream, and used the dream-weaving swordsmanship to kill the blood wolves, he still paid attention to his second brother's movements. He held a few jade talismans in his hands, waiting for Zhang Xiaohu to be in danger. He firmly believed that as long as the blood wolves were within his divine senses, the blood wolves would not pose any danger to Zhang Xiaohu. At this moment, he saw that Zhang Xiaohu's swordsmanship was exquisite. His sword moves were continuous and long. It was the first time he had seen sword moves in his life. Furthermore, he heard that Zhang Xiaohu's breathing, although it was a little rough, did not dissipate. It was enough to show that his inner strength was exquisite. Looking at the inner force in the sword moves, his inner breath was also stable. Although it could not be said to be vigorous, the flow of inner force was smooth. It complemented the exquisite sword moves and complemented each other. He was actually not much worse than Lu Lihong from Wuming Hall. No one knew the foundation of Zhang Xiaohu's martial arts better than Zhang Xiaohua. These two blood-related brothers came to Pingyang City from the Guozhuang house together. It was just that their opportunities were different. Zhang Xiaohua coincidentally embarked on the path of immortality, while Zhang Xiaohu became a direct disciple of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohua did not think that Zhang Xiaohu would be so lucky as to be wiped out in the Misty School, go to a faraway place to spread the incense cult, and have a heaven-defying adventure. Therefore, in just 4 to 5 years, Zhang Xiaohu could not have achieved much in martial arts. However, now that he saw that although Zhang Xiaohu's martial arts were not as good as the outer sect disciples trained by Wuming Hall, he was not much worse than ordinary outer sect disciples like Lu Lihong who had been practicing martial arts for decades. He could not help but feel secretly happy. He laughed and said, "Since second brother likes this jade water sword, why not give it to second brother?" "Jade water sword?" Upon hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu also laughed and said, "The ancients have a good saying. Draw a sword to break water, but water will still flow. This sword can actually repel water, which shows how sharp the sword is. Good sword, good sword." Zhang Xiaohua sweated profusely. It seemed that the repel water sword had nothing to do with this ancient saying, let alone the jade water sword. She could not help but think to herself, second brother has probably been with young master Li Jinfeng for too long. Even his words are sour. Then he glanced at Chang'e, who had fainted beside him, and snickered in his heart. Perhaps it was his jealousy that made elder sister Chang'e faint. Elder sister Chang'e is a charming beauty. Second brother is so lucky. Ha ha ha, father and mother will probably be grinning from ear to ear when they see her. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua landed, he had already used his divine sense to check on Chang'e. He knew that she was not in danger for the time being, so he put her aside. Zhang Xiaohu also knew that if he did not drive away the blood wolf, it would be meaningless to save Chang'e first. Therefore he held the sword and fought the enemy together with Zhang Xiaohua. Second brother, it's buy as in dark green, not do as in evade. Zhang Xiaohua corrected him. However, this sword has no name. I named it myself. If you want, you can call it the breaking water sword. With a poochie sound, Zhang Xiaohu stabbed the jade water sword into the neck of a blood wolf. He shook his head and said, since it has already been named, second brother will not change it. Moreover, this sword is what you love. How can second brother take away what you love? Ha ha ha, Zhang Xiaohua laughed and moved his fingers. In an instant, 3 blood wolves that wanted to break through the sword light were killed. He said, the ancients have a good saying. Beauty is given to a beauty, and a sword is given to a hero. If this decisive sword is not given to a hero like second brother, who else can it be given to? Zhang Xiaohua was also happy. She had not said the words, the ancients have a good saying, for a long time. At this time she also blurted it out. Zhang Xiaohu wanted to say something, but the 2 blood wolves in front of him pounced on him. He did not have time to speak. Thus Zhang Xiaohua said, moreover, second brother, do you think your jade water sword is better than mine? Zhang Xiaohu shouted and punched the forehead of a blood wolf. Then he stabbed it into its eye. Following that, he kicked the tail of the last blood wolf. Then he stood up and stabbed the chest of the blood wolf. That blood wolf let out a sorrowful howl and died. After stabbing a few blood wolves to death, Zhang Xiaohu let out a long breath. He raised his head and looked at the countless blood wolf corpses within a 1 zhang radius of him. He could not help but suck in a breath of cold air and blurted out, how can this small sword of yours be so powerful? That's why, second brother, you can take this jade water sword and play with it. This chasing dream is my favorite. Chasing dream? Zhang Xiaohu was enlightened. He nodded and said, it can even kill dreams. It is indeed stronger than breaking water. Pei. Zhang Xiaohua spat a few mouthfuls of saliva on the ground and said, children's words carry no harm. Children's words carry no harm. Second brother, you are only chasing dreams, not killing dreams. How did you learn these words from young Master Li? Zhang Xiaohu was enlightened again. He nodded repeatedly and said, I understand. Chasing dreams. Then he slapped his forehead and said, is there a little girl called Dream? It had to be said that the power of a direct bloodline was not to be underestimated. They had just met, and he had already guessed Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts. Zhang Xiaohua panicked. A few blood wolves escaped from the sword light, and directly pounced on Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohu laughed loudly and caught the blood wolves with his sword. He said, you are angry out of humiliation. Xiaohua, sigh, I haven't seen you for a few years, and you have a girl you like. Ha ha ha, you have also grown up. As he spoke, he was incomparably gratified. It is better to quickly kill the blood wolves and find time to save second sister-in-law. At the mention of Chang'e, Zhang Xiaohu's heart immediately tightened. He said with concern, Chang'e, she is not that serious, right? At this time, Chang'e was after all unconscious. How could Zhang Xiaohu be completely at ease? Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, don't worry, second brother. After killing all the blood wolves, I will return you an intact and charming elder sister Chang'e. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua so calm and so confident, Zhang Xiaohu was secretly happy. But then he shouted, "Xiaohua, this is a pack of thousands of blood wolves. If the Wolf King summons more blood wolves, can you kill them all? Let's drive them away." Zhang Xiaohua said coldly, "They hurt you and second sister-in-law. How can I let them go? What's more, if they don't eat us, do you think the Wolf King will give up?" While speaking, Zhang Xiaohu was distracted and a blood wolf next to him pounced on him. After all, Zhang Xiaohu had been fighting for a long time. Just now he had given up. At this time, seeing his brother come over, he regained his spirit. Even his internal force was exhausted. How could he fight for a long time? Seeing that he was about to be pounced on by the blood wolf, a green light flew and hit Zhang Xiaohu's body. Immediately, an invisible light shield appeared on Zhang Xiaohu's body. When the blood wolf's claws slashed, the light shield was only slightly dented. But it was extremely tough. Although the blood wolf's strength caused Zhang Xiaohu to fall, it still couldn't hurt Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohu was pounced on by the blood wolf, but he didn't dare to shout. He was afraid that he would disturb Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing that the blood wolf's claws slid past his body and couldn't hurt him, he was surprised. But without thinking, he immediately stabbed out with his sword and hit the blood wolf's vital point. The wolf's blood immediately spurted out. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua jumped over. She stretched out her hands and grabbed the throats of the remaining 2 blood wolves. She exerted force with both hands. Kacha! The blood wolves' necks were already crushed. She casually threw the corpses of the blood wolves to the ground. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Second brother, you should rest. Accompany second sister-in-law first. Leave this to me." Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua easily took care of the 2 blood wolves, Zhang Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. How could she be jealous? She only smiled and said, "Then the capable will do more work. I will rest for a while." After speaking, she handed over the jade water sword. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "No need, second brother. It doesn't matter whether I have the jade water sword or not. I can still use my bare hands." "Don't. Use the sword. Don't let the blood of the blood wolves dirty your hands. I want this jade water sword. You can return it to me when you are done." "Haha, no problem. Second brother, let me show you my swordsmanship." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and took the sword. She then divided her attention and let go of the 2 blood wolves. The blood wolves didn't know that they had already become her test subject. They howled and pounced over. Zhang Xiaohua injected what little qi she had into the jade water sword. The jade water sword immediately shot out a 2 qi long sword ray. With a simple wave of the sword ray, the 2 blood wolves were split into 4 pieces. Sword ray? Zhang Xiaohu was stunned. He wasn't sure if Zhang Xiaohua had used the chasing dream technique, but the sword gleam on the short sword was something he had always dreamed of. He had heard about it from his senior brothers in the Misty Sect countless times. The second of the Misty Six Tigers, Li Jian, had used the green edge sword gleam to almost defeat the sect leader of the Righteous Alliance, Zhang San, when the Misty Sect was destroyed. However, wasn't the sword ray on Zhang Xiaohua's short sword a little too long? It made Zhang Xiaohu feel that it was an exaggeration. Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and smiled. Second brother actually knows about the sword ray. It seems like you are also an expert in the martial arts? Zhang Xiaohu saw that Zhang Xiaohua admitted that it was the sword ray and couldn't help but smile bitterly. If your second brother knew the sword ray, how could he have fallen to such a state? Sword light is a divine ability that your second brother yearns for even in his dreams. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "There's nothing mysterious about this sword ray. It can only be used when one has sufficient inner strength." Before Zhang Xiaohua could finish her sentence, she realized that Zhang Xiaohu had only been cultivating for a few years. He was not like her, who had been absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth. How could he have such a strong inner force? However, he immediately thought of what Valley Head Nya of Rejuvenation Valley had said. Wasn't the legendary qi-generating pill in the Jianghu capable of increasing one's power by 30 years? There were still many of these qi-generating pills in her purse. If she let second brother take a few, wouldn't it immediately make his dreams come true? that you're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.